Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku's imposter syndrome was noticed? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Flying under the radar had never been one of Izuku's specialties. Ever since that day at the doctor's office, the universe seemed hell-bent to move him in the spotlight whether he liked it or not. First, it was Bakugo turning his back on him, was it ever turned towards him, for being quirkless, bringing his classmates to his side. Then, it was the teachers turning a blind eye to the mistreatment while inflicting their own onto him. After that came the sludge villain attack, which fortunately brought him under the tutelage of All Might. He thought that finally getting a quirk would shut off the perpetual spotlight being shined on him, but if anything, it only seemed to make things worse. He'd maimed his arm on live television during the sports festival, how else was he supposed to use one for all? And helped apprehend a notorious serial killer during his internship, becoming known as that crazy kid who broke his limbs with his quirk. It wasn't as if he had a name or anything. The limelight wouldn't even go away during normal school days. In short succession, he had been both nearly expelled and assaulted during Mr. Aizawa's quirk assessment test, and his assaulter, a certain blonde boy, took their teacher's half-hearted attempt of reprimanding him as a green light to proceed with his ill treatment of him. That day, after collecting their syllabi at the end of the day, Izuku had been cornered outside of the UA gates as he waited for Ida and Uraraka. Bakugo had roughly shoved him against the wall, gripping his tie with one hand while popping explosions near his face with the other. Since you chose not to effing listen to me about not applying to you, you better not try and get ahead of me, Deku, he snarled. You already FING cheated your way in here with your bullshit quirk, and you're not going to FING cheat with your grades. If you put a toe out of line, I'll kill you like I said I would during that quirk test. And just like he'd been doing for the past 10 years, Izuku listened. Sure, it took him fudging several quizzes and tests, and maybe it included getting several questions wrong during lectures, but he thought he was doing well enough to stay off of Bakugo's radar, at least in that regard. Izuku was ranked 4th overall while Bakugo sat at 3rd. Of course, that wasn't enough for his acquaintance, but it kept his attention off of Izuku for the moment. That is, until one fateful Wednesday morning during math class. Looking back on it, Izuku blamed it on the fact that it was 8 in the morning and he still wasn't fully awake from yesterday's training session. The dreary weather outside also wasn't helping any. Normally, the anxiety of just being in class was enough to wake him up better than any caffeinated drink could. Class was an exercise in survival where the objective was to not give the teachers any reason to pay attention to him. It was a game he was normally unrivaled at, until that fateful first PRD math class. Mr. Ectoplasm had them evaluate a definite integral written on the blackboard, and that was all well and good except for one thing. There was a typo that wouldn't stop nagging at the green-haired boy. The second bracket shouldn't have had a dash, it should have had a plus. Did Mr. Ectoplasm mean to write the equation like this? Was it an honest mistake? Was this a test for their observation skills? Did he speak up about it? He wouldn't dare correct a teacher, especially in front of everyone. Aldra had beaten that lesson into him, sometimes literally. You think you're smarter than me? His 7th grade math teacher had hissed in the middle of lecture, having roughly pulled him out of his seat and shook him like a can of spray paint, his fingers digging painfully into his upper arms. You think I'm so incapable of teaching that I can't write the correct geometric proof on a blackboard? Why do you have to be such a goddamn problem to the other students? His 9th grade English teacher had shouted, roughly shoving him to the ground with the hand yanking on his hair. The hallway was empty, but that didn't mean he avoided landing face first, pain and blood blossoming from his nose. By seeing that you cheated on this exam, it'll encourage them to do the same. How will they get into good high schools if you keep acting up? Midoriya, his 8th grade science teacher had said in a syrupy sweet, I'm not mad, just disappointed voice that he quickly grew to dread more than the yelling. Do we need to have yet another detention for refusing to pay attention during lecture? Why are you getting such easy questions wrong? Midoriya? Is everything all right? Izuku was shaken out of his memories to find his 10th grade math teacher staring right at him. For that matter, so were his other classmates. Aside from Bakugo, who was giving him a glare that screamed, "Don't you dare speak up," everyone else looked worried. His throat dry, all he could do was hurriedly nod his head, staring down at his blank notebook page as his face heated up to an impressive fire engine red color. "Midoriya, do you need to visit Recovery Girl?" Mr. Ectoplasm asked, concern lacing his voice. He shook his head, pencil flying across his paper as he copied the equation down. "No. I'm fine. I'm sorry for interrupting class. Please buy it, please leave me alone." "Very well," his teacher said slowly, clearly not believing him. "Does anyone have an answer for this integral?" Izuku did. He not only had the answer, he had the correct problem written in front of him. He wasn't going to say anything about it, though. None of the money in Mizudafu General Bank would make him speak up in class. No, he was just going to stay back, keep quiet, and find a way to shut off the perpetual spotlight shining onto him. Izuku loved his lunches with all might. It wasn't just because of the fact that the symbol of peace spent one day a week sharing a homemade bento box with him. He made Izuku homemade lunches, but it was just nice to spend some time with him outside of training. Sometimes they talked about One for All, but other times they talked about anything and everything, from the book series, Eternity, that he'd gotten the older man into to how his classes were going. "Present Mike was telling me about how well you did on your last English exam," the older man said as he held his cup of tea. "You didn't hear this from me, but you were among the only 2 of your classmates to get both of his extra credit questions right. Great job, young Midoriya." The praise felt nice, it always would, especially from All Might, and he felt his cheeks redden as he shrugged and took a sip of his own tea. "I've been reading some really interesting books, and one of them actually had the second bonus question in it." "It better not have been Eternity," All Might teased, grinning at his protege. "You know I'm 1 book behind, and if I find out that you went back on our agreement and have been reading ahead dash." "No, not at all," the teen frantically promised, waving his hands in front of him, unaware that his mentor was just riling him up. "I've been reading other books, I swear. I've been reading the 3rd volume of a comic book series called Captain Hero, and another book called A Treatise of Human Nature." The second bonus question was from page 43 of A Treatise of Human Nature, and the quote we had to pick the correct translation from was, "Reason is, and ought only to be the SLV of the passions, and can never pretend to any other office than to serve and obey them." If you really think about it, that can be applied to the fundamentals of heroics, because a hero shouldn't only save people because that's what they're factually obligated to do, but rather because it's the right thing to do. It falls into the 4 virtues as well, as justice is the main virtue a hero should have dash. "Man, no one is better at spouting word vomit than you, kid." All Might cut in with a laugh. "You sure One for All didn't enhance your speaking ability along with your strength?" Friendly ribbing aside, as Izuku sheepishly stopped his ramblings and looked up at his mentor, he noticed an unreadable expression on his face. It was the same one he had after he rescued both him and Bakugo from the sludge villain last April, and the same one as when he offered to train Izuku to receive One for All that same day. It said that he saw something in him, something no one else had bothered to see up until now. Something he wanted to help nurture and develop. "Sorry, I didn't notice I was mumbling again," he mumbled, staring at his lap. "Everyone's gotten on to me about it dash." All Might shook his head and waved him off. "Don't apologize, my prince of nonsense." He still had that look on his face, and Izuku wasn't sure how he felt about it. "It sounds like it was a really interesting read for you, and it's great to see you so passionate about your studies. Why don't you let me borrow it sometime and we can bounce some ideas off of each other?" Izuku immediately nodded, an excited smile growing on his face as the bell rang, making it falter just a little. Realization that he'd have to get back to class and assume his mission of staying under the radar hit him hard, and he slowly set his teacup on the table and got up, brushing off his pants. Was he stalling? Would it make him late? Probably. Did he care at the moment? He loved these moments with his mentor, and it was up to him to make sure to never take them for granted. "Sure. It's in my backpack, so I'll lend it to you after training today. All Might beamed at him, shooting him a thumbs up as he also stood and led them both to the door. Sounds like a plan, my boy. One day later, Toshinori was stupefied as he sat in the teacher's office and flipped through the book young Midoriya had lent him. A treatise of human nature was an absolute behemoth to read through 480 pages, with present mix bonus question being on page 43 as stated, and it was littered with post-it notes containing annotations and fleeting thoughts digesting the text, annotations and fleeting thoughts that were surprisingly right on the nose. This was easily a university-level piece of literature, and his 15-year-old protege had broken down the text to something he could understand and applied his own opinions to it, opinions that could easily be tied back to the original work. Clearly, the work had hit home for him, but this was a university-level piece of literature. The green-haired boy was a first-year high schooler who wouldn't even be taking philosophy until university, if he chose to attend. Clearly, young Midoriya was smart. After getting to know him and even after just meeting him, Toshinori figured out his intelligence pretty quickly. His analysis notebooks were proof enough. His point had only been reinforced by his grades once the school year started. 4th out of 20 in a curriculum as advanced as UA's hero course was nothing to sneeze at. But yesterday during lunch, as he listened to young Midoriya dissecting this book like he had read through it a million times, he hadn't. The spine wasn't worn down enough for that. He got an inkling that maybe his boy was even smarter than he initially believed. But how? What do you got there, All Might? The symbol of peace jumped as he turned around to scowl at the sudden intrusion into his personal space. The source, Present Mike, cheekily grinned at him as he sat at his desk across from him, Aizawa following behind. Nearby, he could hear Midnight and Cementos' voices approaching as well. Well, the alone time was fun while it lasted. Damn it, Mike, Toshinori muttered, closing the book. Do you really have to scare me like that? It keeps you on your toes, the younger man said with a shrug. And besides, it's not my fault you make it extremely easy and fun for me to want to keep doing it. Trying to fight the fond smile growing on his face, he passed the book over to his colleague. Present Mike could certainly be a lot to handle at times, but Toshinori really liked him both as a colleague and a friend. The man just radiated good vibes and positivity, making it near impossible to stay annoyed at him for too long. To answer your question, I borrowed this book from young Midoriya, he explained. We were talking about his latest English exam, and he had some pretty interesting insights about that second bonus question you gave. It came from this book. The younger blonde made grabby hands towards it, eagerly flipping through it when he got his hands on it. He had told the older man that he'd seen the inspiration for his bonus question in the paper, and he hadn't really expected anyone to get it right. He had been pleasantly surprised to see both young Yaoyorozu and young Midoriya get it correct and plainly said as much while they graded papers together. But as his eyes darted across the annotations written down, his usual easygoing grin slowly morphed into an expression of awe. He let out a low whistle as he closed the book and handed it back to him. Well then, said, clearly at a loss for words as Toshinori set the book to the side. I had my suspicions about the little listener, but Wait, suspicions? The older man asked, maybe a tad too overprotective as he narrowed his eyes ever so slightly. What are you talking about? Haven't you noticed, All Might? Present Mike incredulously responded. Midoriya's smart, like really smart. Toshinori nodded slowly, not really sure of where the voice hero was going with this. Yes, I have noticed young Midoriya's intelligence . No, I mean he's really smart, Present Mike insisted, looking a little impatient that he was being so slow on the uptake. He's like a little curly-haired sponge when it comes to English grammar structure, and you should listen to the way he compares and contrasts it with Japanese grammar structure. Honestly, some of the insights he's told me about are things I saw when studying for the praxis test. Yeah, the kid's good at English. What's the big deal? Are you just happy to have a student who's actually interested in your class for once? Aizawa asked, looking and sounding thoroughly unimpressed as he kept his eyes on his computer screen. That stung, and that comment wasn't even directed towards Toshinori. He saw the split-second hurt flash across Present Mic's face before he immediately masked it and continued on. Interesting. The big deal is that if he's this smart, why are his grades where they're at right now? At both men's confused glances, Present Mic clarified, I'm not saying that being ranked 4th is bad or anything, it's great. But don't you think he could easily be ranked higher up if it weren't for his grades? The black-haired man shrugged. Then he should study more, he bluntly said. If he's as smart as you guys say he is, then his grades should reflect that. His quirk control should reflect that. His decision-making skills should reflect that. The two blondes exchanged dark looks with one another, both silently deciding to ignore the third man from here on out. Their job was made easier by Midnight and Cementos entering the room, taking their seats at their respective desks after greeting their scruffy colleague. Are you saying that young Midoriya may deliberately be not performing to his full potential? Toshinori asked, choosing to rephrase what he just heard in a much friendlier way. Present Mic shrugged. Yeah, I mean, what else could it be? He bluntly asked. I've heard him tutoring his other classmates in things that he'll get wrong on assignments, and it's not like he's telling them the wrong thing or anything. He's teaching them the right things, meaning he knows what he's talking about, but he doesn't apply that to his own schoolwork. If he did, his grades would be way higher, and it's not just me either. Did you hear about what happened yesterday in first PRD math? The older man frowned and shook his head. Ectoplasm had them doing some trigonometry, and he accidentally made a typo in the equation that he had them solve. He didn't notice it until he was already done writing it out, but he wanted to see if anyone caught it. It looked like Midoriya did, but the kid looked like he was being put in front of a firing squad. Like, he was terrified of pointing out the typo. What's even weirder is that when Ectoplasm checked up on him, he saw that he had the correct equation written down. Toshinori frowned deeper. I'll admit that's strange, but you know how shy young Midoriya is, Toshinori countered. I'm not disagreeing with you on what you've seen and heard, but you know that boy avoids the spotlight like his life depends on it. Not when doing heroics, Present Mic countered back, leaning forward in his seat. Not when placed in a life or death situation. You put him in a practical exercise, and his potential is just bursting out into the open. His deductive reasoning, leadership skills, and strategization is in a class of his own. In the classroom, however, he retreats into his shell. It's almost like he doesn't want anyone finding out about his academic potential. The more he listened to his younger colleague, the more the older man couldn't avoid the realization that he was right. He'd always known that young Midoriya was shy, but looking back, he saw that something wasn't quite right in regards to his protégé's intelligence versus his academic performance. Last year, young Midoriya's grades had been pretty bad, putting him 27th out of the 30 students in his class. Seeing both his schoolwork and his natural intelligence and drive, it made something in Toshinori not sit right, but with his boy being hesitant to elaborate on the matter, he let it go. He didn't want to push him into telling him anything he wasn't ready to divulge. Look, you knew him before you were right? Present Mic asked, not a hint of judgment in his voice. Why don't you try asking him about it? He likes you, he'll listen to you. What about afterwards? We talk to the rest of his teachers, and depending on what we see and hear, we get that kiddo an IQ test. Young Midoriya, why don't we stop here for today? Izuku's lungs were on fire, leaving him with only enough energy to nod in agreement as he crouched on the ball of his feet in a bid to catch his breath. He was drenched in sweat, his pea uniform and mop of green, curly hair sticking to him like plastic wrap as he slowly got his bearings back. All Might was drinking a bottle of water, leaning against the tree a stone's throw away from UA they set up shop by. In light of the approaching provisional licensing examination and Izuku's implementation of full cowl shoot style, thank you to both Ida and Takashi Caesar, their training sessions had increased in both frequency and intensity. It had gotten to the point where Izuku was certain that his mentor was attempting to run him into the ground before the exam even occurred. He couldn't complain too much though. After all, he was now able to draw on 7% of 1 for all with no physical drawbacks. Initially discouraged by the mere 2 increase in power, he had been reassured that even a small amount of progress was still progress. It was a nice sentiment, one that Izuku tried keeping close to the heart. Having regained his breath, Izuku walked over to All Might with the grace of a baby deer learning to walk and flopped down next to him. He accepted a bottle of water from the man with a short nod, chugging the wonderfully cold liquid, calling out to him. Young Ida's tutelage has been doing you well. Young man, All Might said with a bright smile. You've been making such amazing progress since developing this new technique. Izuku shrugged, a shy smile on his face as he set his bottle of water down. It's only a 2% increase in power, though, he said. What if that's not enough for the provisional license exam? Will I fail? What if dash? A hand gripped onto his shoulder and he was turned so that he was facing his mentor. Repeat after me, even a small amount of progress is progress. Izuku swallowed, wilting slightly under the blonde's grave expression. Even a small amount of progress is progress. The older man raised his eyebrows. Again. Izuku's blush darkened. Even a small amount of progress is progress. One more time. Even a small amount of progress is progress. With a satisfied nod, All Might reached out with his non-broken hand, and Izuku let out a small yelp as his hair was gently ruffled and brushed out of his face. You need to stop selling yourself short, kid, he gently reproached. You've had a lot on your plate lately, and you've spectacularly risen to the occasion. Ecto told me as much with your latest math test. Izuku stiffened, the mention of his classes making him feel as though something cold and icy had been dumped onto him. Classes had been weird ever since that Wednesday. It was almost like his teachers were keeping a closer eye on him. He'd seen them look over his assignments for longer than his classmates, and he could feel their eyes on him more and more often during lecture. To name a few specific instances, Ms. Midnight had roped him into an after-school study session after he turned in a 15-page analysis on the increasing acceptance and different criteria of what specifically made up guerrilla art. She'd pinched his cheek and warmly praised him for a job well done for his street art interpretation portrait of Tacoba Beach done a day prior. And Mr. Cementos had given him some extra reading assignments on the side after he kept the poor man after class due to his gushing over the hero with 1,000 faces. He had patiently listened to him the entire time, never once letting on that he had papers to grade or other more important things to do. Don't get him wrong, it had all been incredibly fun. Mr. Cementos had a really good taste in books, and Ms. Midnight had floated the idea of her taking the class to the Mori Art Museum for a field trip, but it was all weird. This wasn't what was supposed to happen. Teachers weren't supposed to be nice to him over his ramblings, his cheating, his general existence. They were supposed to get in his face and smack him around, or give him that dead-eyed and disapproving glare while calling him problem child. They weren't supposed to excitedly discuss his artwork or compare and contrast, listen to the voices of the sea, and all quiet on the Western Front with him. And to hear that Mr. Ectoplasm had been talking to All Might about Izuku's latest test, it didn't bode well for him. Oh, what did he say? He asked, trying and failing to keep his voice from shaking, clenching his fists together. Mr. Ectoplasm was nice, but he had to have done something really bad if he was going over his head to talk to. Did you know that for one of the proofs, you used first principles thinking to solve it? Izuku gave his mentor a blank look, the stark opposite of the expression on All Might's face. Not only was it the same one from Wednesday and last April, it looked almost triumphant, like he had been proven right in some way. It's not something taught in high school, he explained, or even in undergraduate studies in university. Instead of using the input data and equations given, you used your understanding of the concept to rederive the equations on your own. It's honestly dash. He's not going to take marks off for that, is he? Izuku almost yelled, panic surging through his veins as he began to hyperventilate. Crap. How had he let himself do that again? My teachers always got upset at me for doing that, and I've been trying to stop, but it's just easier for me to do it that way, and I've been trying not to do it in physics as well because I don't want to get in trouble again dash. Izuku felt All Might's large, bony hand grab his own and place it on his chest. His fingers unconsciously gripped onto the soft material of his polo shirt, rising and falling with each exaggerated breath All Might gave. It's okay, he quietly said. You're okay. Breathe with me. They sat like this for well over 5 minutes, Izuku trying to match his breathing with All Might's. After a while, his mentor's steady heartbeat and grounding touch began to do its magic, and Izuku slowly but surely began to calm down. Exhausted from the roller coaster of emotions he had just disembarked, he reluctantly pulled his hand away so that he could take another long sip of water. "Good," All Might cautiously praised, watching with concern as Izuku set the bottle in his lap. "Now, I was trying to say that you're not in trouble for what you did." Seeing the uncertainty in the boy's eyes, he pressed on. "I promise that you're not in any trouble. Ecto gave you full marks for that question." "No, that's not it. There's more. If it were just a matter of how I did on that test, he would have just come out and said it. There's something else going on." He took a chance and nervously glanced up at All Might. He had the Wednesday look on his face again, but it seemed sadder this time rather than triumphant. "I was trying to tell you that in addition to giving you full marks on that question, he wanted to ask you a question that, frankly, the rest of us have been wanting to ask you as well. Why are you deliberately underperforming in class? Why are you deliberately underperforming in class?" Though there was no anger in the question, Izuku still couldn't help but tense up in preparation to be yelled at. He bit the inside of his cheek, gripping onto the bottle so tightly that it was violently shaking. He stared down into his lap as his mind raced a kilometer a minute. How was he going to answer that question? "We're not mad at you, young Midoriya," All Might kindly reiterated, placing a hand on top of Izuku's head. "We just want to make sure that your potential is being fully realized and nurtured. We're your teachers, and it's our job to help you." But what if he got Bakugo in trouble? So what if he did? He's been getting away with too much for too long. What if Bakugo found out? Then he should just worry about himself for once in his life. He already nearly killed him during the battle trials. Who's to say he wouldn't try again? Izuku would have to make sure Bakugo wouldn't succeed and scare him away from ever putting his hands on him, even if it got him in trouble. Would All Might believe him? He wouldn't let Izuku cut his losses and run when Bakugo refused to work with him in the finals. Would All Might tell Mr. Aizawa? Why did it matter what Mr. Aizawa thought? He clearly hated Izuku, and nothing he did was good enough for him, so why did he even bother trying? What should he do? Do I have to answer that question, All Might?" he quietly asked in a bid to stall for time. "Not until you're ready," All Might responded. "But I want you to know that I'm here to listen whenever you are ready. I won't judge, and I won't even say anything unless you want me to, young Midoriya. Okay?" Well, how was Izuku supposed to leave things as they were after that? He shifted where he sat. "Well, it's a long story." The older man warmly chuckled. "We have all the time in the world for you to tell it." And so he did. It was messy with pauses, stutters, and tears, but the story was finally told. Izuku told All Might about the humiliation and mistreatment from teachers whenever he couldn't keep his DMN mouth shut, whenever he was accused of cheating for doing well on an assignment or singled out for his stupidity when he failed. He told All Might about Bakugo's threat to him on the first day of school, how it stuck him in a lose-lose situation with Bakugo on one end and Mr. Aizawa on the other end. Did he stay the useless Deku and problem child with his not-up-to-par grades, compared to Bakugo's at the very least, or did he perform to his potential and suffer from Bakugo's wrath? He even showed All Might the burns littering his body in a desperate attempt to show that he wasn't lying. The symbol of peace patiently listened, his face betraying no emotion even as Izuku showed the injuries given to him by his so-called childhood friend. Instead, he nodded his head and asked the occasional question for clarification. Once the story was finished, the two sat in silence for what felt like forever. While Izuku admittedly felt as if a weight had been lifted off of his shoulders, he wasn't expecting for his mentor to look so worn down. He seemed downright aggrieved as he sat with his eyes closed, each breath coming out as a deep sigh. "I'm sorry." Izuku jolted. He had been expecting many things once he finished his story, but an apology wasn't one of them. And why was All Might apologizing to him? What had he done wrong to him? It was Izuku's fault for not gritting his teeth and dealing with Bakugo's lessons abuse. He was a hero in training, for crying out loud. So what if he got a few burns? "I completely misjudged the relationship between you and young Bakugo," All Might said in a slow, steady voice. He looked incredibly ashamed as he bowed his head. "Up until the final exam, I had been under the impression that it was a mutual rivalry. I should have realized by the way he acted around you that this wasn't the case. I had my suspicions during the exam, but what you've told me now has confirmed it. I'm sorry for not doing what I should have done back then and pursued the matter further. Izuku's stomach clenched and his head swam as the cold, hard truth tried washing over him. Bakugo was a bully. Bakugo was his bully, not a childhood friend, not an acquaintance, and not even a rival. He was nothing more than a bully, but he had such a perfect quirk for heroics. How did that make him a bully? He was never going to respect Izuku, but it was his fault for being quirkless. Izuku would never win when it came to catering to Bakugo's demands. Kachin couldn't be the #1 hero if Izuku kept cheating and being a problem. He deserved to be backhanded in the face during the final exam. He should have just done what Bakugo said and killed himself. The way that young Bakugo has treated you up to this point is inexcusable, and I'll be having a long talk with Aizawa and Principal Netsu about his punishment. But it's Bakugo! Izuku interrupted, though his voice lacked the conviction it used to have while defending the hot-tempered blonde. He's got a powerful quirk. What about it? All Might bluntly asked, looking incredibly unimpressed with that logic. Are you saying that because One for All is a powerful quirk, it gives its holders free rein to treat people however they want? Izuku's face flushed. No, of course not. He works really hard. He works no harder than you or the rest of your classmates, and I don't see you all using that as an excuse to bully other people, All Might said almost immediately. Did he have that retort sitting on the tip of his tongue? Is he really wrong? Look at how hard I've been working, and all I get is scolded or reprimanded. Izuku felt his lip begin trembling, his eyes filling with tears as he weakly insisted, But Mr. Aizawa? All Might's eyes flashed with barely contained anger as he quietly said, Oh, believe me, young Midoriya, I'll be having a long discussion with Aizawa regarding his part in all of this. Being a hard worker is no excuse for repeatedly breaking UA's student code of conduct. Izuku hiccuped, shaking his head as he failed to hold back his tears. If All Might was right about Bakugo, he was. If he was right that Izuku never should have been treated the way he had been for the past 10 or so years, he shouldn't have been, then. But Bakugo's my friend. I'm sorry, but a true friend would never treat someone the way you've been treated, young Midoriya. That did it. The force of a decade's worth of denial being ripped away and replaced with validation from his idol made Izuku double over crying. It was all too much for him to process at the moment, and he wanted to just get away, but he couldn't. Instead, he felt All Might's hand cup the back of his head and gently pull him into his side, hugging him tightly. His mentor said nothing, just resting his cheek on the top of his head and rubbing the back of his neck with his thumb as he let Izuku cry and cry his lungs out. Why couldn't Izuku ever have anything nice? Why was it that every time something even remotely good happened to him, the clouds opened up for God to say, I hate you, Izuku Midoriya? It happened the first day of school when instead of making new friends and learning about what all UA had to offer, he was humiliated and singled out in front of his new classmates by Mr. Aizawa, as well as nearly beaten up and threatened twice by Bakugo on school grounds. It happened the first day of classes when instead of being able to celebrate actually beating Bakugo during the battle trials, he was not only recovering from a near-fatal injury, he won't die if he dodges, but was scolded and lectured by Mr. Aizawa for his performance. What the hell was he supposed to do, let himself get killed? And it happened the day he passed his provisional hero license exam when instead of celebrating with the rest of his classmates and friends, he was dragged outside to ground beta by a furious Bakugo to fight after curfew. Izuku tried multiple times to leave. He tried telling Bakugo that he had already been given a month's worth of detentions for how he had been treating him. That got him a nasty punch to the jaw. He tried reminding him that they'd be in serious trouble for being caught outside after curfew. He'd been told to shut the F up, and he even tried bargaining by saying they could wait until fundamental heroics the next day. If you don't want to get hurt, then use your fists, was all he said before lunging at him. The fight was messy, and by the time a royally set off Mr. Aizawa managed to erase both of their quirks and capture the two of them with his capture scarf, they both had racked up some nasty wounds. He said nothing as he dragged them both back to the dorm's security room and dressed their wounds. You fought the night of the preliminary licensing exam. I'm glad to see that you both have so much energy left over, he said in a barely held back yell, glaring between the both of them but directing most of his ire towards Izuku. Izuku didn't dare react. He didn't dare say anything as his mind drifted from the present to Takoba Beach. He didn't dare scoff as he heard Aizawa yelling about, "If you stopped wasting your talents and grew up already, you would have passed the exam," before the howling waves of the Pacific took over. He didn't dare glare at his homeroom teacher as he saw the disappointment in his eyes that was directed at Bakugo before the white sand and clear, blue water flashed before him. Why is it always you, problem child? Izuku wasn't at Takoba Beach anymore. He was in Heights Alliance's security room with a livid, 6 feet 1 inch, pink sweatpants wearing man looming over him. For how smart All Might and the other teachers say you are, you sure have a knack for causing me trouble. First, you refuse to get a handle on your quirk, then you betray mine as well the entire school's trust and sneak off to Kamino Ward to play at being a hero, now this. Do you think that just because All Might likes you that you can just do whatever you want and fight whoever you want, DMN the consequences? You think that because I actually get on to you and don't let you coast by on your quirk that you can run to All Might and he'll make it all better for you? Hey, I was the one who threw the first punch, teach. Bakugo angrily interjected. I was the one who wanted to remind Deku where his place was. That fight was on my terms. You think a cheater like Deku could beat someone like me? Enough! Mr. Aizawa finally bellowed, miraculously shutting the blonde up. You're both on house arrest. 4 days for Bakugo, 3 days for Midoriya. During that time, you'll clean all the common areas in the dorm, morning and night. Plus, I want a written apology. If your injuries need to be checked out, head to the infirmary. But don't rely on the old lady's quirk this time. Figure out a way to heal yourselves. The capture scarf loosened around them, and Mr. Aizawa sighed heavily before curtly sending the pair off to bed. Izuku could never have nice things. Finally, he had a teacher in his corner who listened to him and believed him when it came to how he had been treated for the past 10 years by Bakugo and his teachers, and look where that had gotten him. A fractured jaw courtesy of Bakugo as well as both him and All Might in the hot seat with Mr. Aizawa. Are you really surprised that Mr. Aizawa reacted like that? He hates you and probably hates you even more for snitching. To make matters worse, the rest of his classmates were acting as though he was equally at fault as Bakugo was for the whole thing. So stupid. You guys fought and now you're on house arrest. Morons. That's dumb. Did you guys make up? You guys are lucky you only got away with house arrest. You're already missing the opening ceremony for the new term. Izuku gritted his teeth as he stuck the vacuum nozzle into the carpet, trying to mute everything and everyone around him. Them too? He knew they also had blinders on when it came to Bakugo. He had such an amazing quirk, so who could blame them? But now they were turning against him, too? Why wouldn't they? He was a quirkless cheat who didn't belong here unlike everyone else. Why was it that when Bakugo tried to kill him, assaulted him, or insulted him, it was brushed off and excused by everyone, but when Izuku defended himself against this treatment, he was insulted and dismissed? Anyone would pick Bakugo over you. You're lucky All Might felt sorry enough for you to take you under his wing. You should have done everyone a favor and killed yourself. He was angry. He was angry. Bakugo, what are your plans for the remedial license X-? Shut the F up, icy hot. That has nothing to do with you. Out of the corner of his eye, Izuku caught the death glare. Todoroki shot the blonde. If looks could kill, Bakugo would have been dead, but the boy in question was too busy wiping the windows of the common room to notice. Well, at least he had one friend by his side. As the rest of their classmates left the dorm while calling out their goodbyes, Todoroki stayed behind, giving Izuku the much softer and kinder expression that he had grown used to seeing ever since the sports festival and Hosu. I'll see you this afternoon, Midoriya. I'd like your help in preparing for the remedial licensing exam. He shouldered his book bag and gave him a warm wave goodbye before leaving for the day. Oi, de. For someone who cheated their way into UA and fourth in our class, you sure are a shitty cleaner. Bakugo shouted over the laughter and chatter of the dorm's common area. Look at this FNG dust. Your room must be a FNG pigsty if you're leaving the common room like this. Ignore him, Todoroki whispered, directing Izuku's attention back to their English homework. Technically, one of the rules of Izuku's punishment was that no one was allowed to share what was taught in class over the next 3 days, but no one was willing to speak up when the two-toned boy asked Izuku a question about the day's grammar lesson, silently daring anyone to say anything. Izuku nodded his head. So, the sentence structure dash. Deku, you think you're all high and mighty to talk to me because All Might chose you. The room fell quiet, and Izuku felt eyes on him. They were probably mad at him for ignoring Bakugo, probably wanted to see Bakugo put him in his place like the Deku he was. He steeled his nerves and noticed Todoroki clenching his fists, closing his eyes and gritting his teeth. He seemed incredibly on edge, and come to think of it, he always was when Bakugo. Deku, I'm effing talking to you. I'm not afraid to drag you outside for a second round. What happened next was both expected and unexpected at the same time, because while Bakugo storming over to Izuku with explosions popping off on his hands was entirely on point, who could have predicted Todoroki standing between the two and smacking Bakugo in the nose as hard as he could with his English textbook? Time seemed to have stopped, save for two things. Bakugo staggering back from the force of the blow and Todoroki giving the boy no time to recover as he grabbed him by the wrist with an icy hand and dragged him out to the courtyard. Though the two boys moved fast, Izuku caught sight of the blood running down Bakugo's face, coloring both his shirt and the floor behind him. What the F-icy hot? My nose! Bakugo screamed as the two-toned boy shoved him away, only to tackle him down to the ground seconds later. Given how flabbergasting this turn of events was, everyone sat in shocked silence before scrambling to action. While Ida ran out of the dorms with a loud, "I'm getting Mr. Aizawa. This is most unbecoming of heroes in training," others quietly detached themselves from the situation and sneaked back upstairs, muttering about not wanting to be caught in the crossfire when Mr. Aizawa arrived. Izuku was still recovering from the shock that someone actually stood up for him, that someone actually put themselves in front of Bakugo to protect him. Why would anyone protect him? Because you're a good person. Was he worth protecting? Obviously. Look at how set off Todoroki is. Kaminari and Kirishima immediately glued their noses to the window, eagerly providing their own commentary on the fight. Who do you think will win? My money's on Bakugo, Kirishima said excitedly, watching the boy in question have his explosions nullified by Todoroki's ice. Are you kidding? Kaminari incredulously asked as the boy delivered a nasty right hook to Bakugo's jaw. With how feral Todoroki's gone right now, I'm betting on him. He fished some money out of his pocket. 5,000 yen? You're on. Izuku and Bakugo weren't alone in the dorms anymore. Todoroki had been given a week of house arrest along with 2 months' worth of detentions, but he didn't seem to care in the slightest as he helped clean the dorms. He even set up a schedule of sorts for him and Izuku. After getting done with the morning cleaning, the two would study together before repeating the routine in the afternoon. He barely left Izuku's side, making himself a barrier against the battered and bandaged Bakugo, who shot the pair venom-filled glares from across the room but didn't dare say anything. The fight had left him with a broken nose and 3 broken ribs while Todoroki had walked away with some minor scrapes and bruises on his face and hands. That had to have hurt his pride. From what he told Izuku that morning, he hadn't uttered a word as to why he attacked Bakugo the way he did. Instead, he settled for giving Mr. Aizawa an impassive stare as the older man glared at him, trying to pry an answer from him. Bakugo said, "I did it because I was yelling at you for slacking off on the cleaning," Todoroki said as they went over the physics chapter they were being tested over. Ida told him what really happened, but I don't think that Mr. Aizawa cares for the truth when it comes to you two. He was very adamant in how disappointed he was in Bakugo for being involved in 2 fights in 1 week, something about his potential being squandered over another temper tantrum. Izuku bristled under that last comment. It really was funny how someone like Mr. Aizawa, who prided himself on how rational and logical he was, seemed to be willfully ignoring just how angry awful Bakugo was. Izuku was the problem child who had the nerve to be quirkless and not have instant control of his recently manifested quirk, but Bakugo nearly killing or assaulting someone was just a temper tantrum. Bakugo was clearly the common denominator in both instances, Yet the green-haired boy knew that somehow the blame would be pinned on him. It was funny how that worked. It really wasn't. It was messed up and wrong. What did he say about you? Izuku asked as he finished his notes. Todoroki shook his head. He didn't say much. He just kept asking me why I did it, as if he didn't really know. If he can't see what's obviously in front of him, we shouldn't be the ones to point it out to him. Ida already explained everything to him on the way over here last night, so it's up to him to do what he wants with that information. Izuku nodded his head, setting his pencil down. Was it nice to have a friend here with him? Did he wish it was under better circumstances? Also yes. I'm sorry you got in trouble because of me, Todoroki, the green-haired boy quietly apologized. If he was going to be blamed for this incident down the line, he might as well run some preemptive damage control. Why are you apologizing, Midoriya? Don't friends stand up for each other? Izuku blinked and looked at Todoroki, who seemed to be genuinely confused. Whether that was due his self-admitted lack of social skills or the fact that he thought Izuku did nothing wrong was up in the air. I was the one who chose to fight Bakugo, and I don't regret doing it at all, Todoroki went on. I've told you before about Endeavor, and when he charged you the way he did, I had to do something to protect you. His voice was incredibly strained, and Izuku immediately knew what he was talking about. The nights his mother would be beaten black and blue, he and his older siblings helpless to protect her or themselves. Bakugo no doubt must have reawakened those ugly memories by the way he was acting towards him. What does that say about Bakugo as a person? The haunted expression on Todoroki's face was one Izuku never wanted to see again, so he reached out and gently squeezed his hand, rubbing his thumb in his palm. Todoroki, I'm sorry, he whispered. I know that doesn't make it any better or erase what you've been through, but I'm sorry. The two-toned boy nodded, looking slightly better than he had a few seconds ago. It's nothing you did, Midoriya, he said. It just comes down to Endeavor using his power to hurt the people around him. It's the same with Bakugo. The infuriating thing about it all is that because of their quirks and their overall status, people turn a blind eye to it. To us. They do. To us. They do. How had he noticed the parallels? He wasn't sure if Bakugo would ever go down the route of eugenics, but no wonder Todoroki never liked him. No wonder he seemed so dismissive of Mr. Aizawa and the people around them who turned a blind eye to Bakugo's actions. He had Endeavor at home and a mini Endeavor at school. That must have been hell on earth for him. Regardless, I think Bakugo will be leaving you alone after what happened yesterday, Todoroki suddenly said, giving Izuku's hand a squeeze before getting back to their physics schoolwork. But if he tries to hurt you again, I'll hit him with our math textbook. Izuku knew he shouldn't, but he immediately burst into a fit of laughter, muffling it with his hands so no one else could hear. Todoroki, you can't say that, he pleaded through his giggling. You're lucky Mr. Aizawa isn't around to hear that. Todoroki gave a shrug, though a small smile played on the corner of his lips. Well, Bakugo shouldn't treat you the way he does, but look where that's gotten him. It took a few minutes for Izuku's laughter to die down, but when it did, he felt better than he had in days. He felt a new lease on life as he caught his breath and gave Todoroki a grateful smile. Thanks, Todoroki. I'm your friend, Midoriya. Friends don't thank each other for doing the bare minimum. It was Izuku's last day of house arrest, and instead of cleaning the dorms along with Todoroki and Bakugo, he found himself on campus, nervously fidgeting outside of Mr. Hound Dog's office. The cheery phone call he received from Principal Nezu at 7 a.m. didn't reveal much, but Izuku could pick up the hint of excitement in his voice as he told the green-haired boy to report to the guidance counselor's office at 8 a.m. sharp. Due to missing orientation on the first day of school, he hadn't had much interaction with the hunting hero. He'd seen him around campus a few times, mostly with Mr. King Vlad, but that didn't give him enough information to work with before meeting him face to face. What was he like? Was he nice? Quiet? Loud? Could he be trusted? And most importantly, if he was in trouble, why was he being sent to Mr. Hound Dog instead of Principal Nezu? The door opened, snatching Izuku out of his thoughts as the hunting hero beckoned him inside. He steeled his nerves as he walked into the nondescript office and sat in the chair opposite of his desk. I really must say, Izuku Midoriya, you're full of surprises, the mammoth of a man said as he sat across from him. With what I've heard from Mr. Aizawa, I was expecting an egotistical little snot-nosed punk to be sitting in front of me. I'm glad to see that Mr. Rationality isn't as infallible as he likes to think he is. Izuku's mind short-circuited as the whiplash of that exchange hit him. He was so sure that the conversation was going to end with him being insulted, but Mr. Hound Dog insulted Mr. Aizawa instead. Was that even allowed? He resisted the urge to gape, sitting with his hands folded in his lap. Obviously, he was glad that Mr. Hound Dog seemed to be a nice person, but that was not what he had been expecting at all. But we're not here to discuss Mr. Aizawa. We're here to talk about you. And me. Who else? Izuku? Mr. Hound Dog thoughtfully regarded him for a moment before conversationally saying, "It's come to the attention of your teachers and Principal Nedzu that." He stopped himself and switched gears. "We'd like for you to take a few tests. They're mandatory, but they won't have any effect on your grades." He opened a drawer and took out 2 impressively sized test booklets, handing them to Izuku, who rifled through them, whisk and cack. Were these IQ tests? He couldn't do an IQ test. He was a stupid Deku who could easily keep up with university-level schoolwork. Was it too late to leave? They'd just drag you in here some other day. Should he throw the test? They already know how smart you are, they'd see right through it. Should he try his best? Obviously. Aren't you tired of challenging yourself to not challenge yourself in class? Would he be kicked out if he scored too low? There are people here with grades way worse than yours. What if he scored too high? That's not your problem. Hey, don't be scared. Mr. Hound Dog reassured him. No matter how you score, you won't be in trouble, I promise. Breathe, Midoriya. You're okay. Was Mr. Hound Dog reading my mind? He asked himself as he mirrored the older man's breathing. Well, he is a counselor. I guess I also looked pretty scared. I've got a meeting to go to, he announced, looking at his phone and getting up. You don't seem to be a troublemaker, so I trust you to be okay here by yourself while taking the tests. Izuku wasn't a troublemaker. Wait, what? A teacher not only calling Mr. Aizawa out on his assumptions of him, but outright saying that he trusted him and didn't consider him to be a troublemaker? What weird office was he called into today? The rough pat on his shoulder made him jump as he craned his neck to look up at the canine man. When did he cross the room? Answer every question as best as you can, and do your best, he reminded him as he headed out the door. I'll be back later on to check on you and get you some lunch if you're still here by then. Good luck. The door shut, and Izuku was left alone at a crossroads he couldn't hope to navigate. Once Izuku got out of his head and put pencil to paper, he quickly found that the tests were actually fun. The questions were difficult but not impossible, as the answers could be deduced through common sense. Being alone in Mr. Hound Dog's office meant he didn't have to worry about a teacher breathing down his neck, and taking this test meant that Izuku could actually be challenged academically after trying to downplay himself for so long. He could use first principles thinking to re-engineer equations without worrying about a teacher taking him to task over it. He could figure out the answers to logical puzzles as fast as he wanted to without fear of being accused of cheating. He could pick the correct answers to the grammar and vocabulary section, because he didn't have to be conscious of the feelings of a quirkist bully with an unfounded inferiority-superiority complex. For once, he could be in his element without caring what anyone else thought about it. All Might's voice rang through his head. It's our job to make sure that your potential is being fully realized and nurtured. We're your teachers, and it's our job to help you. Mr. Cementas's soothing timbre followed. You have a keen mind, Midoriya. I'd love to hear what more it has to offer. Ms. Midnight's playful whisper came after. Will you let me borrow some of your work? It'll give the third years a nice bit of motivation for their final projects. Mr. Hound Dog's deep growl didn't faze him as it followed. I'm glad to see Mr. Rationality isn't as infallible as he likes to think he is. Mr. Ectoplasm's muffled voice immediately after. Don't ever be afraid of performing with your full capabilities, Midoriya. I'll be giving you more challenging coursework to ensure this. They were right. They'd always been right. He'd been robbed of the opportunity to act on his potential, and this was his chance to reclaim it. Whether he got a high score or not, he could at least walk away with knowledge that he put his all into those tests. That was something neither Bakugo nor Aldra or Mr. Aizawa could ever take from him. Toshinori took pride in being someone who had a steady hold over his emotions. That hadn't always been the case, especially in his teenage years. It was only through Nana's patient coaching and a few smacks to the head courtesy of Gran Torino that he learned to think before feeling. Count to 10, Toshinori. Get control of your temper, Nana would gently tell him, rubbing his shoulders with her thumbs. Damn it, Toshinori, think before you feel. Gran Torino would yell in exasperation before cuffing him upside the head. If you don't use your head for once in your life, you'll be caught in a situation that'll get you killed. They had been mantras he lived by ever since he was a UA student, and it was one continued to live by in his 40-something years as a pro hero. He couldn't be the symbol of peace if he let himself fully and properly react to every injustice he came across. But that was before he retired. That was before he found out about the bullying and mistreatment his boy went through for 10 years and counting due to being quirkless and too smart for other people's liking. That was before he heard about the events that had transpired 3 days prior. He had an incredibly busy day, meaning he couldn't be directly involved. He'd been in Tartarus, trying not to kill the symbol of evil as he attempted to weed out the League's endgame, as well as at the hospital for some testing his doctors wanted him to undergo. As a consequence, he was left in the dark about not only how the provisional license exam went for his students, why in the world was the HPSC having the first years take it, but about the fight that occurred between young Bakugo and young Midoriya that same night. When his colleagues told him what had happened and the consequences handed down, it took him no time at all to figure out that young Bakugo was the one at fault. Was it biased of him to think that? Maybe. Did he have his reasons for thinking that? Definitely. Did he have evidence to back up his claim? Oh yes, he did. He had both circumstantial evidence and physical evidence. Young Bakugo could barely go a day without being reprimanded by his teachers for how he was acting or something he did in class, and the boy practically lived in after-school detention due to it. Trying to reason with him never worked, and neither did scolding him or sending him to hound dog for anger management sessions. Parent-teacher conferences also proved to be a bust, and the negative press his behavior at the sports festival garnered didn't even make the boy blink. It wasn't long before his colleagues began passing a bottle of extra-strength Advil amongst each other before their classes with 1A in preparation for the inevitable headaches they'd have by the time the bell rang. It wasn't long until exhaustion and barely contained annoyance seeped into their voices at the mention of young Bakugo's name. It wasn't long until present Mike and 13th's dislike for the boy began becoming harder and harder to hide. In 13th's case, who could blame her? The boy nearly got her killed during the USJ attack and didn't seem remorseful for it. And that wasn't even counting the security tape from the camera bot that recorded the incident in question. Toshinori and the other teachers in charge of the first years had been called into an early morning meeting over it, a television screen connected to Ned's laptop greeting everyone. Once everyone was present and accounted for, hound dog arriving last due to a prior engagement, and simple pleasantries were exchanged, the footage was played. We shouldn't be walking around like this so late at night. Young Midoriya had tried saying, pulling back against the tight grip on his wrist. We'll be in so much trouble if we get caught breaking curfew. You've always made me sick, young Bakugo spat, tightening his grip, that had to be tight enough for his wrist to bruise. How was this not noticed? You were always useless and you were quirkless, so how did you cheat your way into UA? How did you get a quirk? Well, it looked like the cat was out of the bag in regards to young Midoriya's quirk status. That is, if questions hadn't already been raised during the quirk assessment test after young Bakugo's tirade. Judging by the confused glances being exchanged, that didn't look to be the case. You passed the provisional license exam and I failed. What the hell, huh? Young Bakugo screamed, roughly shoving the green-haired boy away from him, sending him crashing to the ground. Hound Dog looked furious, only being kept calm by Cementas's hand on his shoulder. Everyone else showed varying expressions of shame, disappointment, and anger save for Nedzu and Aizawa. Nedzu was never one to be expressive with his emotions, but the way his ears were pointed back and his tail wagged said everything about how he felt. And as for Aizawa, the annoyance on his face was slowly giving way to sheepish realization that he quickly masked. Shut the F up and listen, you demon scum, Young Bakugo yelled before the footage was fast-forwarded, showing the blonde lunging at young Midoriya, explosions popping off in his hands. The green-haired boy turned and tried to run, only to be cut off by a swipe to the throat by the blonde. He then tried reasoning with him to at least wait for the next day's fundamental heroics class. He already had a month's worth of detention and couldn't afford to get into any more trouble. The punch to the jaw he received in response made present Mike wince sympathetically. If you don't want to get hurt, then use your FNG fists, young Bakugo sneered before lunging again. The cat and mouse game continued for a good several minutes until young Midoriya finally activated his quirk and began fighting back. The footage was stopped when it neared the end of the fight, and the room was silent. Count to 10, Toshinori. Nana reminded him, her voice ever so soothing and near to him. Damn it, Toshinori. Think before you feel. Gran Torino yelled, reflexive apprehension curling in his stomach at the sound of it. Distance may have greatly improved their relationship and young Midoriya may have softened him slightly, but the older man was certainly still a force to be reckoned with. Toshinori tried. He honest-to-God tried to keep his temper under control, but the things said and done in the security tape made it incredibly difficult to do so. What made it even worse was the stubborn expression on his underground hero colleague's face as everyone directed their attention towards him. Was this man going to sit here and deny what was spelled out for everyone to see? Did you know that this footage existed? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper as he glared at him. Seeing as how you were alerted by another camera bot about it, you had to have known. Did you decide to draw your own conclusions about what happened without examining the footage beforehand? The younger man bit his lip, uncertainty flickering across his face for a mere second before the stubbornness came back. Clearly, this was someone not used to being called out for his wrongdoings. What was there to examine? He asked. The two of them are always causing trouble. That was the wrong thing to say. Oh, now you acknowledge young Bakugo's shortcomings. Toshinori sarcastically exclaimed. The behavior write-ups from us weren't enough. The constant after-school detentions weren't enough. Hound Dog's notes regarding young Bakugo's refusal to engage in their sessions together weren't enough. Not even his abhorrent conduct at the sports festival was enough. I'd like to know what makes this instance so different for you, Aizawa. I'll admit he's rough around the edges, but he's working harder than anyone to become the #1 hero, Aizawa said, glaring at the older man. He clearly has potential. That doesn't excuse bullying. Hound Dog yelled, lunging at the man before Cementos caught him. It's your responsibility to curb this behavior, and you've been letting it fester under your direct supervision. The canine man quickly dissolved into mess of howls and growls that were peppered with angry Aizawas and enablements and insults to teachings. As he was promptly ushered out of the room, Ectoplasm spoke up. I concur, he said. I don't wish to shift blame, but there must be a reason why our attempts to correct Bakugo's behavior have been unsuccessful. It's most strange that you've disregarded it, considering your extensive expulsion record. Aizawa crossed his arms over his chest. Clearly, the math teacher hit a sore spot with that remark. The boy has potential. Enough with this potential nonsense. Toshinori finally yelled, shooting to his feet. You have seen time and time again that young Bakugo does not have behavior fitting for a hero in training, yet you turn a blind eye to it. He's broken UA's student code of conduct time and time again, yet you repeatedly stick your neck out for him. How dare you give that drivel about him being a hard worker and a great hero in training when he acts like this? All Might, Nedzu spoke up from the head of the table. What? He asked in a shorter tone than he would like. When he turned to the mammalian principal, he noticed the grave expression on his face. You need to calm down or else I'll have to ask you to leave. Toshinori and Nedzu stared at each other for a long moment before the blonde bit the inside of his cheek and took his seat once again. I apologize for that outburst just now, he quietly said, shame building up inside of him. Damn it, Toshinori. Why can't you think before you feel? That could have waited until the meeting was over. It was unprofessional of me to act in such a way in front of you all. It's not like you're wrong though, Present Mike piped up. Seriously, Shota, why do you keep hyping this kid up when you've expelled others for way less? The raven-haired man glared at his friend in betrayal before answering. "You know I have my reasons for expelling students," he said through gritted teeth. "I'm trying to protect them. Are you?" Midnight asked, shooting him a disapproving glare. "Because it seems to me like you're using potential and protectiveness as an excuse to get rid of students you don't like. Take Midoriya for example. Aizawa clenched his fists. "That kid refuses to get a handle on his quirk and his self-sacrificing tendencies. Are you saying that kid was supposed to let himself and that 5-year-old with him die at the training camp?" she asked in a dangerously quiet voice. To the man's credit, he looked and sounded genuinely appalled when he immediately answered, "Of course not, Namuri. All I'm saying is In that instance, he only went overboard with his quirk because he was in a life-or-death situation," she continued, her voice rising over his protests. "Before that, he learned during the first 2 days of his internship to better utilize it." 2 days, Shota. He was off campus for 2 days and he learned more about his quirk than he ever did here. What does that have to say about us as teachers? What does that have to say about you? That's not fair and you know it, Aizawa growled, pointing at her. I have 18 other students. You sleep in class. Present Mike jumped back in, giving his friend an appalled glare. You sleep instead of teaching them when you have 2 other kids who need help with their quirk control. Kaminari's lack of control over his quirk nearly got him killed at the USJ, but whenever anyone comes to you for help, you just tell them to figure the answer out on their own. You pick and choose which students to give a crap about. They've had their quirks for over 10 years at this point, and if they don't have control over them by now, what am I supposed to do? Present Mike threw his hands up in frustration. Here's a radical idea. Stay awake in class and actually teach the students who are actually in your class for once in your life. It's not like you as a school or anything. Everyone needs to calm down and get back to the matter at hand. Nedzu called out, his tail wagging sharply. Once everyone went silent, he nodded his head. Though I disapprove of the way you all are conducting yourselves, I am in agreement that the situation regarding how Bakugo's continued misbehavior has gone ignored has grown out of hand, he said. He turned to Aizawa, disappointment clear in his eyes as he said, Aizawa, we already discussed your role in letting Bakugo negatively affect Midoriya's academic performance, and I don't need to tell you how disappointed I am in your lack of action towards rectifying that behavior. Aizawa stared at the table, conflicting emotions flashing across his face as he said, I was hoping that the pair would learn from each other and overcome their faults. I punished them for this fight, because they can't break the rules whenever they want. It's clear from the footage that young Midoriya was defending himself, Toshinori said through gritted teeth. Count to 10. Count to 10. Count to 10. Nedzu will kick you out if you lose your temper again. What is he supposed to learn anything from this other than the fact that he can't trust his homeroom teacher to protect him from his bully? Aizawa blinked, clearly taken aback by the question. He sat mulling over his answer for a moment before shaking his head. People change, he said, though the justification clearly rang hollow to him as well. Bullies can learn from their mistakes. Shota, I hate to break it to you, but not every bully is like Sensoji, Present Mike said in an even voice. It's great that he turned over a new leaf in our 3rd year, but with how Bakugo's been treating Midoriya, I don't think that's going to happen with him. Are you forgetting that he nearly killed Midoriya during the battle trials, and not only did he not care, you just brushed it off with a grow up? What if, God forbid, Midoriya had been killed? Would you still be as laid back about it then? Toshinori cringed at the memory of Bakugo's crazed smile as he yelled, he won't die if he dodges. Thank God young Midoriya did in fact dodge the potentially fatal blow. He wanted to cuff his past self over the head for not lobbying for his expulsion right then and there. And when he looked over at Aizawa, he clearly wasn't alone in that sentiment. The way Sensoji treated you was messed up and horrible, and I'm not minimizing what he put you through, Present Mike continued, but the situation between you two isn't the same as Bakugo and Midoriya's, and I think you know that. Aizawa ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated at how this meeting was going. He looked as though he wanted to say something, and he opened his mouth and closed it a few times before finding his words. Midoriya's attitude is going to get him killed, he finally said. He has potential, but I can't just sit by and let him think he's invincible because he has a strong quirk that it took until May for him to get control of. He's not Oboro, Shota, Midnight said. What happened to Oboro had nothing to do with his quirk. It was a tragic accident. He wouldn't have died if he hadn't run to that building while it collapsed, Shota snapped. I see Midoriya making the same mistakes as he did and it makes me angry. I don't like being portrayed as the bad guy when all I'm trying to do is protect him. Young Midoriya didn't get his quirk until the day of the entrance exam, Toshinori finally said, silencing his colleagues. While Ectoplasm, Midnight, and Present Mix faces lit up in understanding, Aizawa looked befuddled as he gave a flat, "What?" Young Midoriya's quirk manifested late for his own protection, he continued, the lie rolling easily off of his tongue. He had been planning on letting the faculty in on the secret of One for All at this meeting if it came up, but it was clearly not the priority at the moment. Tackle one problem at a time, Toshinori. I helped get his physical condition and muscle mass up to par within the 10 months leading up to the exam, otherwise it would have killed him. As the information settled within his younger college's mind, he looked downright haunted as he slowly asked, "So you're telling us that when he broke his arms and legs during the entrance exam, when I nearly expelled him back in April? Those were the first 2 times he ever used his quirk?" "Yes," Toshinori bluntly answered. Aizawa looked to be at a loss for words, and the looks his colleagues were giving him were unreadable as Nedzu spoke up again. "I think this has gone on for long enough. Aizawa, it's clear to me that you aren't in the right headspace to properly teach or protect your students," he said evenly. When he received no response, he continued. "It seems that I have no choice but to officially place you on probation and have your teaching license suspended." If the younger man felt any type of way about the proclamation, he didn't show it. "For how long?" he asked. "Your license will be suspended for 6 months, and the probation will last a year. Should you have properly reflected on your failings as a teacher, you will be permitted to return to teaching within a year and a half's time. Consider this to be your final warning before termination." No one dared react to Nedzu's firm words. No one dared to look at Aizawa as he simply nodded his head. No one dared to say anything as he continued on with handing down his verdicts. As for Bakugo, he will be expelled from UA High School. When this meeting is adjourned, I will call him and his parents down here to process the paperwork and clear out his dorm room. I was hoping that he would take into consideration the help we've offered in correcting his behavior, but we can only do so much with him refusing to amend his behavior. With that, the meeting was adjourned and Aizawa was called to stay behind. Out of the corner of Toshinori's eye, he caught the disappointment radiating off of Midnight and Present Mike as they regarded their friend, and despite his own less than warm interactions with the younger man, he couldn't help but sympathize with him. It wasn't easy to have your shortcomings pointed out, but the only thing you could do was take them to heart and genuinely try to amend them. It's what Toshinori was in the process of doing, and it was now something Aizawa was going to have to do. He seemed to genuinely realize the gravity of his actions and how they negatively affected the people around him, but would he truly change? Time would tell. Bakugo was called into the principal's office at least 3 times a year, but it was never for anything bad. More often than not, it was so his parents could hear about how he ranked at the top of his class for the entire term. More often than not, it was so he could get another award for something or another that he didn't care to remember. More often than not, it was so his parents could hear the no-name extra sitting behind the desk gush about how Bakugo's high grades and amazing potential would make him a shoo-in for prestigious hero schools like UA or Shiketsu. It was so they could ramble on and on about how amazing it would be for a humble school like Aldra to have an amazing alumni like Bakugo among their ranks. Please. They had it all wrong. He was using them, not the other way around. Bakugo had it all planned out since 5th grade. He'd attend a no-name school. His parents almost sent him to Kifinji Some, something he and the old had gotten into many fights about before she finally relented, and establish himself as the one at the top of the food chain before getting into UA and making a name for himself. He'd get first place at every sports festival, work with only the best pro heroes, and then become the #1 hero after graduation. It'd be just like All Might's ride to fame. He had come from a no-name school in Tokyo before making a name for himself at his 2nd and 3rd year sports festivals. After graduation, he spent a few years in North America before returning to Japan and utterly dominating the Japanese hero Billboard chart. It was the perfect underdog story and the script that had been playing out perfectly for Bakugo until he began attending UA, that is. Before attending UA, he never got in trouble. Never. Sure, he'd had a few talks with his teachers if he came in a few minutes late or spoke a little too loudly in class, but they were just talks. They'd pull him aside after class and explain what he did wrong in syrupy, sweet and calm voices that let him know that he wasn't really in trouble and this was just for appearance's sake. So what if they had to rinse and repeat the routine a few times? It was all because of the FNG extras around him. He was never in any real trouble. That all changed once he started attending UA. Sure, the hobo never outright catered to Bakugo like his previous teachers did, but there was an unspoken agreement that he wouldn't get in trouble for showing the other 18 extras who the top of the food chain belonged to. At most, all he ever got was an exhausted, grow up, and stop wasting your potential. But with the sheet he said about him at the press conference, it'd be great for when he became #1 later on, he knew that he had the green light to do as he pleased. It looked like the other teachers didn't get that message. He was either snapped at for speaking up or put in after-school detention for the FING stupidest things, like speaking too loudly or telling off an extra. Minor things that the teachers and the old hag were completely overreacting to. More than once, he caught the banana hair teacher glaring at him like he said in his cereal during class. Teachers never glared at him before. Teachers never put him in detention before. What the F- changed from 9th to 10th grade. What the F happened to make him and his parents get called to the dogs, rats, bears, weasels, office to be read the riot act and told how much he SEKD? This wasn't his role. This was Deku's role. The fucker practically lived in the principal's office for the last 10 years due to everything under the sun. Cheating, disrupting class, starting fights, etc. More than once, he'd overheard the teachers talking about putting a reserved sign on the chair outside for Deku alone. They should have gone through with it. It'd show the useless piece of shit his place in life since his lessons obviously weren't sticking. Was that why he was waiting outside of the weasels, mouses, hamsters, office? It couldn't be, not when the hobo closed the matter up with that bullshit house arrest punishment. Why did he suddenly have a problem with him putting Deku in his place? It's not like he cared before. It didn't make any sense. Nothing made any FNG sense anymore. First, the quirkless fucker gets a quirk and gets into UA, something they agreed he wouldn't do. Then he rides his coattails to be 4th in the class, another thing they agreed he wouldn't do. Then he gets FNG rescued by the useless sack of shit and his little gang of extras. He was doing just fine without their help. Then he FNG snitches about his lessons, getting him even more on the old hag's bad side. The biggest FU of all is him passing the provisional license exam. It had to be rigged against him. There was no way he FNG failed, and now today? The fucker got called to the Mutt's office for a few hours before coming back all chipper and happy, while Bakugo had to sit and wait for his undoubtedly set-off parents to hear the bear, polar bear, grizzly bear, out? It wasn't fair and it didn't make any sense. This wasn't supposed to happen. It wasn't. 3 things greeted Ochako and the rest of her classmates when classes let out for the day. A black Lexus, a silently fuming brunette man carrying out some boxes, and a livid Bakugo being flanked by a furious woman with more than a passing resemblance to him. Were those Bakugo's parents? Were they moving his things out? Wait, if they were moving his things out, that meant expelled. You got yourself FNG expelled from the #1 heroic school in the country, the woman screamed, tossing a loaded box into the truck. You're really FNG amazing, Katsuki. Most kids would take a month's worth of detention as a message to get their shit together, but not you. No, you took that as a message to give your teachers and classmates the finger and do whatever the hell you wanted, consequences be demanded. I got the message, you old hag. Bakugo yelled back. You don't need dash. Katsuki Baku, you will not speak to your mother like that, the man quietly warned, turning to glare at his son. The boy in question curled his lip in disgust but kept quiet. You've already embarrassed yourself as well as us with your behavior today. Don't make things worse for yourself. Ochako gaped, and she could hear her other classmates muttering to one another in shock. Bakugo got expelled? But how? No, she shouldn't ask that. Of course she knew why. Everyone in class did, not that they'd ever come out and admit it. It had something to do with the fight from 3 days ago. Everything had been so weird since then. She knew that he was upset about failing the licensing exam. How could he not have failed with the way he was acting? But him dragging Deku out for a fight to take his anger out on him was a new low. No, it wasn't. It was on brand for him. Then, the both of them were put on house arrest for it, which was just mind-boggling for her. Deku never looked for a fight. Anyone who had been around him for more than a day could realize it, so why was he also punished? Why did everyone else accept Mr. Aizawa's story as fact? Even Ida took things at face value, leading the two of them to get into a small argument about it during lunch. He was one of Deku's best friends, and best friends believe in one another no matter what the stakes are. How could he just blindly accept the fact that Deku was also at fault for what happened? Their bespectacled friend was changing his tune by that evening, as was everyone else. Zero had been teasing Bakugo about a tiny amount of dust on the common room's windowsill, and of course he chose to take it out on Deku, who was at the kitchen table with Todoroki. No one had spoken up in his defense, and he seemed to be trying to ignore it before the blonde advanced towards him, explosives at the ready. That shook a few of them out of their stupor. Kirishima tried holding him back, but was roughly pushed away. Ida and Ochako both got up, ready to do what they should have been doing this whole time and protect their friend, but Todoroki acted swiftly and harshly. She had to admit, the hit to Bakugo's face with his English textbook would have made Gunhead proud, same with the ensuing beatdown in the courtyard. Maybe she should recommend him to Gunhead for their upcoming work studies. In the ensuing chaos that followed, she couldn't help but feel glad that someone finally put the blonde in his place. He had gotten away with far too much, and she knew that not only were they to blame, but Mr. Aizawa was as well. Ever since he'd threatened to expel them all on the first day, she hadn't really trusted the man. She could see that he had something against Deku starting with the quirk assessment test, and he'd been constantly singling him out ever since. She remembered the differences in feedback after the battle trials. Bakugo had nearly killed Deku, and all he got was a "grow up, stop wasting your talent and stop sulking like a child about your loss." Izuku had been defending himself and got a "I see the only way you won the match was by messing up your arm again. Work harder. And don't give me the excuse that you don't have control over your quirk. That line's already getting old. You can't keep breaking your body while training here. But your quirk will be really useful if you can get a handle on it, so show a little urgency, huh?" Clearly he didn't like Deku. Ochako could tell as much, and it was a topic of discussion amongst her classmates as well. Man, if he's this mad about Midoriya hurting himself with his quirk, how's he going to feel about me short-circuiting when I overuse my quirk? Kaminari had nervously asked before homeroom once. "Hey, you don't know that for sure." Zero had tried reassuring him. "I really hate to say it, but what if it's just Midoriya he has a problem with?" Ochako had glared at him, and he shot his hands up in defense. "I'm not saying that's okay or anything. I think it's really messed up, and Midoriya's a cool guy and all, but, come on Uraraka, he's the only one Mr. Aizawa gets on to." "Incredibly unprofessional behavior," Tokoyami had said, his head bowed in thought. "He's a really scary guy." Ashido said, quivering in his seat. "We'll just have to do everything we can to stay off of his radar." Ochako had wanted to say more, but the man in question stepped into the room, cutting their conversation short. Those first 2 days of school set up a pattern that was to become routine for everyone. Bakugo would bully Deku, and Mr. Aizawa would do nothing to correct him. Deku had tried diffusing the situation by saying they were childhood friends, but Ochako knew that on some level, it wasn't true. That didn't stop her from naively hoping that the two would set aside whatever was wrong between them and be friends again. God, she was so stupid. What childhood friend treated someone like Deku the way Bakugo did? Nothing about their interactions with one another screamed childhood friendship, and she should have seen through that claim as soon as it escaped Deku's lips. He was her best friend, and she should have done more to protect him. They all should have done more to protect him. They all should have gotten their textbooks and joined Todoroki in his beatdown of Bakugo. Maybe then they could feel a real sense of victory and vindication in seeing a humiliated Bakugo being kicked out of UA. Those your classmates? Bakugo's mother asked as they came to a stop outside of the dorms. Bow your head and give them the apology of your FNG life for what all you've put them through. Bakugo growled and clenched his fists. I'd rather die than apologize to these effing extras, he yelled. I didn't do anything wrong. It's that shitty Deku's fault for not minding his effing place. Hey, that's messed up, Kirishima reproached, a troubled frown on his face. Midoriya's never dash. Oh, F off, shitty hair. Bakugo snapped. It's not as if I give a shit about what you have to think. The redhead winced. That hurts, he muttered. Who gives a F dash? You all are just a bunch of no-name dash. Katsuki, that's enough. Bakugo's mother hissed under her breath, grabbing his forearm and pulling him close. He opened his mouth to yell some more, but Todoroki, coming out with the trash in one hand and his heavy physics textbook in the other, quieted him down in an instant. Her friend's facial expression was as stoic as ever, but the threat was clear as day. Keep insulting my classmates and friends, and I'll re-break your bones in front of your parents. Taking advantage of their now former classmates' silence, Ochako stepped forward. She hadn't done a good job defending Deku in the past, so she decided to say her piece while she still could. She owed him that much, at least. You're a selfish coward, Bakugo, she spat, glaring at him. You always felt so threatened by Deku standing up for himself and growing stronger dash. I'm sorry, but did you just call Midoriya Deku? Bakugo's father asked, his voice much kinder and softer than it had been moments ago. Ochako felt her resolve falter slightly as she nodded. Why, yes, sir. It's his hero name, and he said it was okay for me to call him that. Bakugo's mother essikidi her teeth as she gave her son a glare that could kill. How many times have we told you to stop calling him that? She snapped. You really do think that you're so FING high and mighty that you don't have to listen to anyone, not even your own parents. No one gave a F. I dare you to finish that sentence, Katsuki. I dare you, his mother hissed into his ear. What's the issue? Kaminari asked. It's what Midoriya picked as a hero named Dash. It's short for Dekunabo, kid, Bakugo's mother cut in a brusque but softer voice. It means useless, and we've been trying to get Katsuki to stop calling him that for years. Everyone sat in shock at that revelation. Seriously? Wasn't it just established that Bakugo was a bully? Why is everyone so surprised that he'd been calling Midoriya by an insult this entire time? Don't be a hypocrite, Ochako. You also called him Deku. Don't act like you're any better than they are. Dude, what the hell? Siro whispered. My point is that Midoriya was becoming his own person, and you saw that as a threat, Ochako continued, letting her anger at Bakugo, her classmates, Mr. Aizawa, and herself fuel her. You thought that your quirk made you God's gift to everyone around you, and that gave you an excuse to bully him. You thought that was an excuse to bully us as well. Well, to me, you're nothing more than a pathetic excuse of a hero training who peaked in middle school. The other teachers may turn a blind eye to behavior, but I won't, and neither will we. Now that you've been expelled from UA, no hero school will want to take you. You'll never become a hero, and you have no one to blame but yourself. She could see Bakugo barely resist the urge to roll his eyes, wincing as his mother pulled him over to the Lexus. Get the F inside, she hissed as she opened the back seat door. We're going to have a long FING talk about your behavior when we get home. As he obliged her and the door slammed shut, the two adults faced Ochako and her classmates, bowing their heads in remorse. We apologize for taking up your afternoon, and we apologize for the trouble our son has caused you, Bakugo's father said. I truly wish we could have met under better circumstances. We knew that Katsuki had been growing more out of control as he grew up, and we knew his teachers were letting it happen, but we couldn't imagine it ever getting this bad, Bakugo's mother added. As his parents, we should have done more to get him under control. Thank you for at least trying to put up with him, and thank you for rescuing him in July. The two adults gave their farewells, and within minutes, the Lexus was driving away, taking Katsuki Bakugo and his belongings out of Ochako and Class 1A's life forever. He would most definitely not be missed. Izuku's feet barely touched the ground as he fidgeted in the chair in front of Principal Nedzu's desk. He was sitting up straight, his back against the back of the chair as he tried not to watch the mouse bear dog looking over the IQ tests he took. He had been told by Mr. Hound Dog that the tests wouldn't affect his grades, but now that the bravado had worn off, he was terrified. Was he really as smart as they were saying he was? Yes, he was. Had he just been playing a long con over the years with his grades? No, he hadn't. How would his score change things in the future? He didn't know, and that was okay. He dared a peek at Principal Nedzu through his bangs, and he didn't know how to feel seeing the rather pleased gleam in his eye as he looked back and forth from the test booklets to the answer keys. That meant he had done good, right? That meant that his best truly was his best, right? It did mean that. Well, Midoriya, Principal Nedzu said, looking up from the tests and folding his hands, together. I must say, you are a rather remarkable young man. Izuku bit his lip, cringing at the blush appearing on his face. He was blushing in front of the principal. What had his life come to? Remarkable? That wasn't a word most people used when describing him. All he ever really heard was plain, problem, useless, reckless, and other variations of these words. To be called remarkable by Principal Nedzu of all people felt surreal. Are remarkable how, Principal Nedzu? He softly asked. The dog bear mouse simply smiled back at him. You performed exactly as I expected you to, he said, a hint of pride in his voice as he laid the results out in front of him. Though it was great fun giving you a challenge in the form of 2 IQ assessments, the CAP needs to be supplemented by a second assessment, such as the whisk. Your performance in each index score was incredibly high, and your overall scores on both assessments show that you are profoundly gifted. On the CAP, you scored a 145, and on the whisk, you scored a 160. Izuku stared blankly at him, his heart pounding in his ears. He could hear what he was saying perfectly, but it wasn't absorbing in his brain. 145 and 160, those were high scores, weren't they? Yes, those are both very high scores, Principal Nedzu said, head to the side in amusement. That meant he really was smart, didn't it? You have no need to hide your academic potential anymore, Midoriya, Principal Nedzu kindly said. We can ensure that your academic needs are properly being met now. The green-haired boy swallowed, folding his hands in his lap. He knew that on some level he should be happy to have the principal of UA praising him like this. He should be happy to hear that the scores didn't lie, that he really was smart, but what does that mean for me? Will I have to switch classes? He asked, an unexpected fear gripping him. He had no love for Bakugo, Mr. Aizawa, but he couldn't leave the rest of his friends. What would he do without Uraraka, Ida, Tsuyu, or Todoroki? If he was going to be moved to another class, there was no guarantee that he would get lucky in the friend department. Hound Dog and I will be discussing this along with the rest of your teachers, but as of right now, we will be keeping you in 1A, the bear mouse dog reassured him. We wouldn't want to disrupt the cohesion that has developed between you and your class. As a compromise, we will be supplementing you with a more challenging curriculum designed by me. Izuku didn't like the devious glint in his principal's smile as he set the test booklets and score sheets aside. Now that we know what your mind is capable of, we wouldn't want you to become complacent, would we? Izuku shrugged helplessly, shaking his head. He had a vague feeling that Principal Nedzu and his teacher's definitions of challenging were complete opposites, but he had to take his wins wherever he could. But what he said about classroom cohesion, did he really have that with 1A? Sure, he liked his classmates. They were easy to get along with, and enduring the USJ incident and training camp attack only brought them closer in a way the other classes couldn't really understand, Class 1B being the exception. Heck, he counted Uraraka, Ida, Tsuyu, and Todoroki to be amongst his closest friends. Why didn't they do anything about Bakugo? The question was one he tried ignoring ever since the battle trials occurred, something that became increasingly difficult as the year went on and Bakugo got worse and worse. He would never admit it out loud, but it felt vindicating as he watched Todoroki break Bakugo's nose. He would never not be grateful to him for noticing, for not just standing by like everyone else did. He hated that it got him in trouble. He was defending someone from being brutalized. Uraraka tried, That was more than he could say about most, but she tried by telling them to just get along, or just be friends. How could he be friends with someone who told him to kill himself because he was quirkless? How could he be friends with someone who backhanded him for trying to work together with him? How could he be friends with someone who constantly attacked him in front of other people because he knew no one would stop him? Even if Uraraka's claims were naive, she still tried calling Bakugo out. Compared to how Kirishima, Shiro, Mina, and Kaminari fawned over and followed Bakugo, and wasn't that hilarious? The two people who supposedly hated bullies and could never understand them counted one as their friend. They stood by as Izuku was beaten up and insulted. They thought Bakugo was so manly for his quirk, and it was so funny how manliness, privilege, and potential were measured by if you had a powerful quirk, let alone a quirk at all. It felt much less like a slap to the face because she didn't smile and laugh with Izuku before going to hang out with the boy who made his life a living hell. All that told him was that they condone his behavior. All that told him was, sorry he burns your things and wishes you would die, Midoriya, but he's strong and awesome and manly dash. What about Bakugo? Izuku blurted out. When he heard how forceful the question came out, the hidden anger that leaked out momentarily, he cringed. Sorry, he whispered. I didn't mean to yell at you. Principal Nezu folded his hands, together and nodded thoughtfully. Yes. Your classmates' behavior has certainly had an effect on your class's cohesion as of late, not to mention its negative effect on your well-being. His ears pricked back, tail wagging for a moment before he relaxed. He was smiling serenely again, his eyes kind as he said, rest assured, you won't need to worry about him coming in the way of your growth as a student and a hero anymore, Midoriya. Izuku furrowed his brow. He wouldn't? Sure, and he's the Prime Minister of Japan. The world would probably end before Bakugo ever faced consequences for his behavior. I won't? How come? Principal Nezu ignored his question, still smiling as though he heard a particularly funny joke as he opened one of his desk drawers to take out some forms. I think that we've kept you here long enough, Midoriya, he said conversationally. Why was he dodging his question? Why don't you enjoy the rest of your day? You're dismissed. Izuku stood and made his way to the door. Though his encounter with Principal Nezu had gone much better than he anticipated, he couldn't wait to get out of his office. Nice or not, he was still the principal. You can also disregard the apology letter assigned to you by Mr. Aizawa, he called out after him. After all, it's gotten in the way of your educational development, wouldn't you say? Izuku narrowed his eyes. This was getting weird. First, something happened to Bakugo that Principal Nezu was being rather cagey about. Then, he doesn't have to write his apology letter anymore? He wasn't complaining, since he'd admittedly been putting it off, but he felt like there was a conspiracy going on right under his nose, and the answer was right in front of him. He wanted to ask what that little comment was supposed to mean, but he had a feeling he would be ignored again. Make sure you get plenty of rest, Midoriya. I'd like to start you on your new curriculum tomorrow, Principal Nezu said as he waved him out, that weird smile still on his face. Weird. Principal Nezu was weird. Principal Nezu was a nice but weird mammalian being. Hopefully, Izuku would get the answers to his questions once he got back to the dorms. He felt like he wouldn't sleep until he did. Ejiro Kirishima always prided himself on being able to see the best in everyone around him. He had been raised to believe that people couldn't be boxed off into solely good or bad people. He'd always been told that you had to get to know someone before passing judgment onto them. It's why he could never understand bullies. How could someone make a snap judgment about a person and then torment them over it? How could people be mistreated for things such as their quirk, their hair color, or their height, to name a few? It was wrong, and it was something Kirishima couldn't just sit by and let happen, but he was scared, and it wasn't for lack of trying either. He'd intervene if he saw a classmate being bullied, but then the bully would turn their attention to him and his simple quirk. It got his face smashed in by a rock, and his friends told him to not intervene. It's why he respected Ishido so much. He'd known her since middle school, and she was just so cool. She was pretty, had a strong quirk, and was all around an amazing person who never failed to put bullies in their place and have them reconcile with their victims. There were talks amongst their teachers and classmates about her being a shoe-in for becoming a ranked pro hero in the future, But she never let it get to her head. How manly was that? Her attitude, alongside that one Crimson Riot interview, inspired him to get out of his head and apply to UA. It's what made him decide once and for all to stop being a coward and fully live by Crimson Riot's philosophy. High school was supposed to be a do-over for him. High school was supposed to be the chance to wipe the slate clean from his years of trying and failing to be brave. But as he watched the black Lexus drive away from Heights Alliance, he was hit with the realization that for all of his bravado of starting over, he hadn't changed at all. He was nothing more than the same coward back in middle school who let that underclassman be carried away by those bullies. He knew all the way back from the quirk assessment test that Bakugo and Midoriya had a history together. Why else would Bakugo have bum-rushed him the way he did? The battle trials only enforced his point, and he felt helpless watching the blonde ambushing him, pulling the pin on his gauntlet as all might demanded for him to stand down, lest he kill Midoriya. The whole thing left a bad taste in Kirishima's mouth. Bakugo left a bad taste in Kirishima's mouth, but that changed when the USJ incident happened. Maybe it the way Bakugo took charge of the situation and had Kirishima help him try and ambush that Warp Gate villain. God, he would never not be sorry every time he saw Ms. 13. Maybe it was the way they fought together in the Ruin Zone and tried fighting that villain again. That was a bond that wasn't easily broken, but in hindsight, that was when the rose-colored glasses fell onto Kirishima's face. At the time, when Bakugo got in front of Class 1B and 1C and vowed to defeat them in the sports festival, Kirishima had thought the way he stood his ground against everyone was amazing. When he got up in front of the crowd and vowed to win, he just brushed it aside as Bakugo being himself, and he didn't think much of his feral rage as Ms. Midnight announced his loss to Uraraka. The way she held her own against him had been the manliest thing ever. He just needed to get control of his temper, stop getting so many detentions, and then he'd be amazing. Right? The signs were all there, and he should have read them. The two of them were studying for their final exams, and not only had Kirishima been screamed at and insulted by him the entire time, they ran into some old classmates of Bakugo and Midoriya from middle school. According to them, Bakugo's temper used to be even worse. He used to be self-centered, someone who thought the world owed him. He used to be so bad that had it been 1 or 2 years ago, the blonde not only wouldn't have offered to tutor anyone, but he would have gone as far as to beat up anyone who dared approach him. He also learned that they bullied Midoriya due to believing that he was quirkless. At the time, Kirishima couldn't believe it. Midoriya had a crazy powerful quirk that broke his bones whenever he used it. How could he have been quirkless? Midoriya was also an amazingly kind person. Who would ever bully him? Weren't you bullied for your quirk? He hadn't made the connection between how they felt like they couldn't compliment Midoriya in front of Bakugo or how angry hearing Midoriya's name made Bakugo. He hadn't made the connection in how Bakugo's yelling got them kicked out of the library and Midoriya got the blame even though he wasn't there. Wasn't Midoriya always flinching anytime Bakugo yelled or used his quirk? Wasn't Bakugo always yelling at Midoriya and using his quirk on him? For that matter, wasn't Midoriya really quiet and not confident in himself? What was it that he thought to himself that day? Was it how Midoriya may have felt after being bullied for so long? Was it how to help him build self-confidence? No, it had been. Forgiving was just a small deed for Midoriya. He lives and breathes for the sake of saving those who are suffering. Midoriya's thoughts and feelings in the matter had been completely brushed aside. It had been so easy to rationalize back then. Midoriya was such a forgiving person. Why else would he continue referring to Bakugo as his childhood friend and refuse to draw a line in the sand? Why else did no one else intervene when the blonde lost his temper on him? If it was a problem, then Mr. Aizawa would have stepped in, right? Ashido would have said something, right? If Midoriya didn't have a problem with his behavior, then it wasn't his place to intervene, right? Right? The revelation of Bakugo's expulsion from UA proved him wrong. The revelation that Bakugo was unapologetic for the way he treated Midoriya proved him wrong. The revelation that Bakugo couldn't care less how he treated him and the rest of their classmates proved him wrong. The revelation of what Deku meant proved him wrong. The revelation that his past teachers saw nothing wrong with any of this proved him wrong. Katsuki Baku, someone Kirishima thought of as a friend and pillar of manliness to look up to, had been a bully. He had not only been a proud bully, but Kirishima had just sat by and let it happen right under his own nose. He really hadn't changed at all from middle school. So much for reinventing himself. The moment Izuku stepped into the dorms, he knew he could kiss his planned nap goodbye. All of his classmates were gathered in the common area, and the moment the front door opened and closed, he felt 17 pairs of eyes snap towards him. They were looking at him with varying levels of curiosity, remorse, and concern, and it made the hairs on his neck raise. Why was everyone looking at him like he had just been diagnosed with a terminal illness? He toed his shoes off and switched them out for his slippers, trying to ensure his face didn't betray the mounting anxiety trying to take over him. Hey guys, what's up? He lamely offered. Everyone exchanged uncomfortable looks with one another before Ida stood and all but sprinted towards Izuku. Midoriya, please allow me to profusely apologize for my conduct the day before yesterday, he announced. It was very unbecoming of me to assume that you were also at fault the night you and Bakugo fought. It took a bit for the green-haired boy's brain to comprehend what just transpired in front of him. No one but all might ever apologize to him when it came to him and Bakugo, but when his bespectacled friend's words finally hit him, his usual smile spread across his face. Hey, don't worry about it, Ida, he said, sheepishly scratching the back of his head. You didn't know the full story, and I guess I really should have put my foot down and said no. To his immense surprise, Ida gravely shook his head. Thank you for your generosity, but I'm afraid that my actions cannot be disregarded, he countered. Bakugo's abhorrent attitude towards you is nothing new to any of us, and it was obvious you were coerced into participating in the fight. As your friend, I should have given you the benefit of the doubt until proven otherwise. I promise that I will work hard to make amends for this, Midoriya. Ida's intensity towards life was nothing new to Izuku, but the intensity he was putting into this apology felt vindicating. Hearing those words come out of his mouth, that he was coerced into fighting, that he should have supported him from the word go, felt like a salve for a gaping wound that he only just recently started to acknowledge. And hearing those words from one of his best friends was something he hadn't realized he needed up until now. He knew the hurt wasn't going to be erased just yet, but this would be an amazing step forward. Swallowing down the lump in his throat, he looked up at Ida and smiled. Okay, Ida. Looking around behind the taller boy, Ochako beamed, tears welling up in her eyes. Todoroki nodded approvingly from next to her. Everyone else was still looking at him with apprehensive guilt, and as he did another head count, he noticed that someone was missing. A certain blonde-haired, red-eyed bully of his. Craning his head to listen upstairs, he didn't hear the telltale yelling and cursing that signified his presence. A quick glance at the shoe rack let him know that both his slippers and shoes were gone. What was going on? What were his classmates not telling him? Guys, where's Bakugo? He asked, trying and failing to sound nonchalant. He didn't even know why he was so scared. Maybe it was the dour atmosphere in the dorms, or maybe it was the fact that something clearly happened while he was on campus and no one wanted to be forthcoming about it. Either way, it rubbed Izuku the wrong way. Tsuyu stepped out from behind Ochako, practically the embodiment of concern as she looked at Izuku. Bakugo was expelled, rib-bit, she quietly said. He was really angry about it. Tsuyu's voice faded into the background, and the room spun. The floor was pulled out from under Izuku's feet, and he could hear yelling before a pair of strong arms caught him and helped him over to one of the armchairs. Someone was yelling at someone else to get some water, but he didn't care about any of that. Expelled. Katsuki Bakugo was expelled. UA, the top heroic school in the country, had expelled Bakugo. A cyclone of conflicting emotions swept onto Izuku: horror, concern, guilt, relief, elation, surprise. Bakugo would never forgive him. He told him to kill himself. What is there to forgive? The mark on his permanent record would bar him from any other heroic school. Good, it'll protect everyone else from him. Bakugo would never become a hero. Whose fault is that? Principal Nedzu said he wouldn't have to worry about hiding his potential anymore. Was this what he meant? Obviously. How did everyone else feel? Why did it matter how they felt? Were they upset at him for ruining Bakugo's career? That was on them for putting their eggs in Bakugo's basket. Did they hate him? Hey, Midoriya. Izuku looked up from his lap. It was Ashido who was kneeling in front of him, and he'd never seen her look so serious in his almost half a year of knowing her. She held out a glass of water and tentatively patted his knee. "Drink this. It'll help you calm down." He took the glass with a shaky hand, taking hesitant sips of the cold liquid as his surroundings came back to him. He was flanked on both sides by Uraraka and Todoroki, Tsu and Ida both incredibly close by. Everyone else was situated around him throughout the common area, trying not to suffocate him. Ashido was still in front of him, and he could see that Kirishima had joined her. "Hey, Midoriya," he said quietly, his hands clenched into fists by his sides. "I just wanted to say that I'm sorry. I didn't know that things were that bad between you and Bakugo dash." "Yes, you did." Dark Shadow piped up as he manifested out of Tokoyami. He flew over to Izuku and wrapped him in a protective hug. Bakugo was always awful to Midoriya. Kirishima winced. "I know. But why didn't you ever say anything?" Izuku quietly asked as Dark Shadow rested his chin on top of his head. "Why didn't anybody say anything?" As his classmates shifted nervously where they sat, as they gave each other and Izuku unreadably nervous looks, Tokoyami finally spoke up. "We don't have an acceptable answer for that, Midoriya," he said, looking Izuku steadily in the eye. "But it was inexcusable how we stood by and let it happen. I offer my most profuse apologies to you." Siro rubbed his neck. "I'm sorry too," he added. "I guess I just bought into the hype surrounding how strong he was. It was really messed up of me dash. We also thought if it was really a problem, Mr. Aizawa would have said something." Kaminari interrupted. "I mean, isn't he always going on and on about how super strict he is and he'll expel us if we sit at our desks the wrong way?" Jairu narrowed her eyes at the blonde. "Yeah, but it was pretty obvious that he had it out for Midoriya from day one," she said. "It doesn't make it any less okay, but since he never said anything about it, we didn't either." Yaoyorozu clutched her arm, guilt clear as a day across her face. "As vice president, I should have intervened before things got this bad. Midoriya, I'm so sorry." Izuku kept his eyes on Kirishima. While everyone else wasn't blameless in letting Bakugo go unchecked, they were at least acknowledging their part in it with minimal to no excuse. They also weren't the ones who constantly went to bat for him and gushed about his manliness or how amazing he was in spite of the battle trials or the sports festival. "I'm a coward, Midoriya." The blunt admission brought a whole new level of tension to the room, and Ashido looked behind her in concern at her red-haired classmate. "I always hated bullies, still do. And though I wanted to intervene, I could never find it within me to man up and put them in their places. Man, you were one of the reasons I applied to UA in the first place. Seeing you charge at that sludge villain while the pro heroes just sat back and did nothing was amazing. It was inspiring." The small, wistful smile on Kirishima's face faded, and he took a deep breath before continuing. "I was bullied due to my quirk growing up, and with how Bakugo actually gave me the time of day, it put up some blinders in me with how he acted towards you, Midoriya. I should have seen how aggressive he always towards you for what it was and not rationalized it away in my head. Midoriya, I'm sorry." He bowed his head, and Izuku just stared at him, honestly conflicted on how to feel. On the one hand, Kirishima had always been nothing but kind to him. He was never afraid of swallowing his pride and asking him for some extra tutoring, praising him when he got a better grade on a test or an assignment. He never participated in the bullying or egged it on. Everyone in class liked him. His apology seemed genuine. But on the other hand, he was perhaps the biggest cheerleader that Bakugo had. While he never outright condoned or participated in the bullying, he never did anything to stop it either. He always brushed off Bakugo's outbursts as just him being himself and never tried pulling him aside to tell him that his behavior was wrong. Though his apology seemed genuine, it was a long time coming. For the moment, he settled on a simple nod. "Thanks, Kirishima," he quietly said. "You shouldn't have been bullied for any reason. I think I'm going to lay down for a little bit. Thanks for your apologies." He never said he forgave them. He never said he forgave Kirishima. What did that mean for their relationship in the future? Dark Shadow gave him one last squeeze before reluctantly returning to Tokoyami, and as he stood up, he answered the silent question Ida, Todoroki, Uraraka, and Tsuyu asked with a look of his own that said, "I just need a nap. I'll explain everything later. I promise." He headed up the stairs and welcomed the familiar sanctuary that was his room. He let the door shut behind him as he flopped face first on his bed, letting sleep take over. Izuku paced back and forth in his room, his four closest friends watching uneasily as he tried and failed to keep his wits about him. The gravity of what he was about to tell them hadn't hit until the dinner dishes were cleared. The katsudon was obviously an olive branch extended to him, not that he was complaining, and he was given a knowing look from Uraraka that said, "You had your nap and your dinner, so you better keep your end of your promise." She was right, but that didn't stop him from trying to stall for time. He could still remember the frantic call to All Might, asking him if he was really making the right decision. He wanted to know if letting them in on the century-old conspiracy, on his past quirk status, would do nothing but cause pain for everyone involved? Would they reject him? Would they hate him for lying to them for so long? He could remember All Might's soft laugh as he said, "You truly are my prince of nonsense. One for all is your quirk, which means who you tell or don't tell is up to you." The smile left his voice, however, when he confessed, as to how they may react after finding out about your past quirk status. "I honestly can't say. If they're your true friends, it won't matter to them, but know that a quirk isn't what makes a hero who they are." At the moment, it was nice to hear that, with him also being quirkless, he truly understood, but now that he couldn't stall for any more time, the words sounded ominous. Sure, they were nice to him now, but what would happen once he told them? Would they call him a cheat? Would they tell him to throw himself off a bill? "Midoriya, you don't have to tell us if you're not ready to ribbit," Tsuyu quietly said, tilting her head thoughtfully. Ida nodded earnestly. "We don't want you to feel coerced into confiding in us, Midoriya. You're clearly distressed at the moment, so why don't we wait until you've had some rest?" Izuku ran a hand through his hair, shaking his head as his face scrunched up in frustration. "If I let you guys leave, then I won't be able to ever tell you," he shakily said, clenching his hands into fists at his sides. Ochako stood and tentatively took his wrist in her hand. "But you're clearly not in a good frame of mind. I'm quirkless." Silence. He looked down at his shoes, not wanting to see the shock, the disgust, the pity in their eyes. His hands started shaking, and though Ochako hadn't let go of him, he couldn't count that as a win just yet. He had to tell them everything, even if it ruined their friendship. I was born quirkless. I'm not a late bloomer or anything. Back in middle school, I met All Might." He told them everything then. He told them about what Bakugo had said to him that day on the school roof and how it led to him meeting All Might. He told them about his second meeting with All Might that same day after Bakugo from the sludge villain. He told them about how the symbol of peace saw him doing the right thing while everyone around them, him included, did nothing, offering to give him his quirk. He told them how he cleaned up to Koba Beach and received the quirk the morning of the entrance exam. That led into the explanation about one for all, not superpower. He told them the tale of the two brothers at the center of it, how he had been sworn to secrecy not just for his own sake, but for the world's as well. The League of Villains already targeted UA enough as it was. What would they do if they found out about the truth about one for all? His four friends stayed silent throughout the entire 40 or so minutes it took for Izuku to tell it, and they were silent for a long while after he finished. This was it. This was when they cast him aside for being the cheat he was, worming his way into UA while everyone else earned their spot. "Oh Dek Midoriya." Before the green-haired boy could react, Uraraka flung herself into his arms. Her voice was wobbly, a clear indicator that she was close to tears. "We're so sorry. We had no idea you were dealing with all of that," she said, burying her face in his shoulder. "We're such horrible friends." Izuku hesitantly returned the hug, rubbing up and down her back the way All Might did when he was upset like this. "And no, Uraraka. You're not a bad friend, and neither are Ida, Todoroki, or Tsu." His voice also began trembling, and he swallowed down the lump in his throat before he also started crying. "It's my fault. No, it's not, Midoriya." Ida fiercely objected. None of this is your fault. Bakugo said that to you? Todoroki growled. And Mr. Aizawa thinks he'll be the #1 hero? You kept all of this a secret to protect us? Tsu tearfully said, getting up and joining Uraraka in hugging their friend. Midoriya, aren't you scared? His breath hitched at the blunt question, and his vision blurred as he tried in vain to hold back his tears. Honestly, Tsu? Why yeah, he choked out. I'm terrified. I'm terrified that All for One not only nearly killed All Might, but now he probably wants me as well. I'm terrified that Shigaraki's going to one day attack the school and we won't be prepared. I don't want to see anybody else get hurt because of me. We're your friends, Midoriya, Todoroki reassured him, placing a warm, steady hand on his shoulder. When did he get so close? Aren't friends supposed to rely on one another in times of hardship? A sob escaped Izuku's throat. Why you're still my friends? Even though I was quirkless. A beat of silence followed, and Ida got up. He wrapped his arms around all of them, and the way his shoulders shook indicated that he had surrendered to his tears. Why, you idiot? He ground out through his tears. Why would that ever be a factor in whether or not we're your friends? You saved my life from stain. Midoriya, we're your friends because we like being around you, Todoroki added, his voice trembling slightly. You're nice to us. You've helped us with our hardships while expecting nothing in return. Why wouldn't we be your friends? Your quirk status doesn't matter, so you choked out. All that matters is the kindness in your heart, and you're one of the kindest people I've ever met. You saved my life at the USJ, remember? We're with you in this, Midoriya, Uraraka promised, giving him a tight squeeze. We'll help you in any way we can, whether it's by protecting you from All for One, or giving the what for to anybody else who tries to bully you. You're stuck with us whether you like it or not. Izuku shook his head, now crying freely. This conversation wasn't happening the way he expected to. He was expecting insults, beat-downs, calls for him to jump off. He wasn't expecting them to be so nice about it. How had he been so blessed to get friends like them? Izuku was almost unintelligible with how hard he was crying. But, it's not your fight dash. Isn't meddling where you don't need to the essence of being a hero? Ida quietly asked. If Izuku and his friends spent the rest of the night in a huddle crying their eyes out, no one dared to say anything about it. Izuku loved early morning runs. He loved how the crisp, cool air lit his lungs aflame as he ran through the streets of Mizudafu down to Takoba Beach. He loved how the moon and stars in the night sky reflected off of the Pacific Ocean, making the normally blue water sparkle. He loved how the beach was practically deserted this early in the day, allowing him to run up and down the stretch to his heart's content. Most of all, he loved how his morning runs belonged to him and him alone. There was no Bakugo around to use his quirk on him or scream obscenities at him. There was no Mr. Aizawa looming over him or criticizing him without any offers of help. There were no classmates to worry about losing because he couldn't master one for all. It was just him, the pier, and the ocean air. The runs had been routine for him even before moving into the dorms, and after a few days of reconnaissance, the routine had been able to remain without a problem. All it took was memorizing the camera bot's postings, as well as Mr. Aizawa's patrol schedule and check-in schedule, for him to have 4 hours of uninterrupted free time a night. It was 4 hours of uninterrupted bliss. Most of the time, he would lay back in the sand, letting the howling waves serve as a meditation medium for him to hold on to. Other times, he would stand just where the concrete met the sand, wondering just how far the Pacific stretched out to. Today, however, he was at the pier. He leaned against one of the beams holding the roof over him, closing his eyes as the salty air invigorated him in a way not even Katsudon could. For once, he felt at peace with everything. With himself. Mr. Hound Dog would be thrilled to hear it at their appointment Friday morning. Izuku smiled to himself as he thought about the canine guidance counselor. He couldn't believe he had been scared of him yesterday. Did all of that really happen yesterday? It felt like a lifetime ago. Underneath his brusqueness and all of the growling, he truly cared about Izuku's plight. He cared enough to not only make an unfavorable comment about Mr. Aizawa in front of him. Seriously, would he get in trouble for doing that? but also to schedule weekly appointments for the two of them for the foreseeable future. You're a UA student, and it's our job as teachers to not only help you grow and develop as heroes, but also to make sure that you're happy and confident in yourselves. He had said in the email that he read only an hour ago. So much had happened that he hadn't even been able to look at his phone, let alone use it. It said more things, such as the dates and times for their appointments, but at the end of it were 3 affirmations he wanted Izuku to practice saying to himself every day. You'd be surprised at how much of an effect words can have on people. They won't make everything go away completely, but they're a start, were the words that preceded them. Standing up straight, Izuku took a deep breath. I am worthy and whole, he quietly said to the sea. Hugging himself against the ocean breeze's cold air, he took another breath. I believe in my abilities. His eyes stung for a moment, and he took a minute to wipe at them before whispering to himself perhaps the most difficult one for him to believe. I am enough. A pair of featherlight hands gently squeezed his shoulders, and a hauntingly familiar voice whispered in his ear, Of course you are. Izuku gasped and turned around, but as soon as the first one for all user had appeared, he vanished just as quickly. All he got a glimpse of were a pair of green eyes that were strangely identical to his. After an early morning shower and an additional 3 hours of sleep, Izuku awoke to start his first official day back on campus. As he washed his face, he tried swallowing down the usual anxiety that gripped him in the morning. As he brushed his teeth and combed his curlier-than-usual hair, the beach always did that to his hair for some reason, he tried to not think about how Bakugo's expulsion had changed the dynamics between his classmates. As he packed his backpack and flung it over his shoulder, he tried not to wonder just how much more Mr. Aizawa hated him for getting rid of a student he had so much faith in. No, you didn't get rid of Bakugo. He got himself expelled, Izuku told himself. And if Mr. Aizawa doesn't like that, then Todoroki can go break his nose with his English textbook. The unexpected thought made Izuku laugh to himself in both mortification and elation. Sure, he'd been taught to revere his teachers, and yes, Mr. Aizawa had saved their lives more times than he could count, but allowing himself to disparage the man felt much more cathartic than he anticipated. As he headed downstairs to get a start on his breakfast, he was unexpectedly pulled towards the kitchen and sat down at the table, where breakfast had gotten a head start on him. Before him was a plate of chocolate bread, a bowl of sliced kiwi, and a cup of coffee and milk. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw 6 other identical setups as well. And if Izuku had to guess, it was courtesy of Bonjour and Bon Appetit, Midoriya. Aoyama greeted, gracefully taking the seat across from him. I hope you had the most dazzling of sleep last night. Izuku chuckled, rubbing his neck. Aoyama was nice, but he could certainly be a lot this early in the morning. Yeah, I did, he said truthfully. Sure, it was only 4 hours of sleep, but he had no nightmares or weird one for all related visions. Instead, there was just the familiar presence of the first one for all user, a light but warm hand on his back. That had to count for something. What about you? I thank you for your concern, but I slept fabulously, the blonde proudly decreed. That's why I provided you and the rest of our compatriots with a classical French breakfast. Well, that explained the partially set table. Hopefully, everyone else wouldn't be offended. Before you is a pain au chocolate with some fruit and a café au lait. Truly one of the best inventions to come out of France, and I get to share it with my friends. Go on now, eat. Aoyama's excitement was contagious, and despite still in the middle of waking up, Izuku dug into his breakfast. It wasn't what he was used to, but he actually quite enjoyed it. The bread was warm and flaky, the pieces of dark chocolate in the middle being a welcome surprise. The coffee wasn't as bitter as he thought it would be. It was also something he desperately needed after getting only 4 hours of sleep, and he always enjoyed fruit in the morning. Overall, though, he was mostly touched by the kind gesture his seemingly self-absorbed classmate prepared. He knew that most people avoided Aoyama due to his flamboyant vanity, but there was more to him than that. Much more than that. Izuku couldn't help but feel a kinship with him due to the nature of their quirks. Both came in later than normal. Aoyama's came in when he was in 1st grade while Izuku's came in 9th grade. And both had pretty physically debilitating drawbacks when misused. Izuku's bones and ligaments were injured while Aoyama's gastrointestinal issues had him carrying around a bottle of electrolyte solution to combat dehydration. He also put himself at risk multiple times for the sake of his classmates, using himself as bait during the forest camp attack as well as the first round of the provisional licensing exam. That alone was incredibly respectable. When Aoyama reached out to him with that weird cheese message, Izuku couldn't find it in his heart to turn him away. Instead, he took the offer of friendship and integrated him into his ever-growing group of friends. They all had welcomed him with open arms, and that was really all Izuku could hope for. He couldn't sit by and let someone else be ostracized the way he had been. Swallowing a piece of coffee-soaked pastry, Izuku smiled. "This is really good, Aoyama," he said. "I hope it wasn't too much trouble for your family to send this over for us, though." The blonde shook his head, primly sipping his own coffee. "Nonsense. They were more than happy to have this sent here. In fact, they were going to also send over a full déjeuner and diner before I stopped them." He laughed fondly before his smile softened, becoming somewhat sad. "Truth be told, Midoriya, they're grateful that I've made such wonderful friends," he said wistfully, nibbling at his pastry. "I haven't had that much luck in that venture growing up. The cruelty of children can be incredibly shocking." He gave Izuku a kind and knowing look as he set his cup down, and rather than cower away and shrink in on himself, Izuku found himself nodding along. Looking back now, Bakugo's cruelty had been shocking, as had that of his former classmates. It didn't surprise him to find out that Aoyama had been bullied as well. "Aoyama, do you miss Paris?" Izuku asked. When he noticed the blonde's already sad smile tightening, the green-haired boy panicked and entered damage control mode, waving his hands in front of him. "You don't have to answer if you don't want to. I'm sorry if I dash." "I don't know." Aoyama didn't sound or look upset. In fact, he seemed rather matter-of-fact about the whole thing. His face was unreadable as he looked at Izuku. "I've always been a child of two worlds," he continued. "So it didn't matter which country we moved to, or what continent we lived on. I was always going to be different. And as we both know people don't like differences." They both finished at the same time. They both chuckled at the lucky coincidence before Aoyama shook his head, seemingly fighting a battle within himself. Izuku gave him some time, wanting to give him some space after that vulnerable confession before the blonde straightened up in his seat. He squared his shoulders and looked the green-haired boy in the eye. Was it just Izuku, or did he look almost scared? "Are you all right, Aoyama?" he asked, alarmed at how more and more panicked his classmate and friends seemed to be getting. "Midoriya, there's something I dash." "Hey, Midoriya." "Aoyama. Good morning." Uraraka bounded down the stairs, followed by Ida and Tokoyami, who appeared to be having a deep discussion about something, and Todoroki and Tsuyu, who were still rubbing the sleep out of their eyes. She leaped over to them and paused, gasping as the plates of food on the table. "Whoa, Aoyama," she gushed. "It looks so good. Are these for us?" Aoyama looked almost relieved by the interruption their friends provided, and he shakily tried returning to his usual extravagant attitude. His eyes gave his residual fear away, though. "Bien, sir, Uraraka," he exclaimed, acting affronted as they took their seats. "It's up to me to make sure my friends are exposed to finest of French cuisine." "I like bread," Todoroki commented, picking up his pastry. Tsuyu smiled widely at Aoyama. "Thanks, Aoyama. This was really kind of you to do this for us, Ribbit." It's fascinating how different the concept of the French breakfast is from the Japanese breakfast we've all grown up with. I thank you for allowing us to embark on this culinary adventure." Ida enthusiastically exclaimed, taking a bite out of his bowl of orange slices. "Thanks for not forgetting about me, Aoyama." Dark Shadow enthused as he dove into his coffee. "This coffee rocks. Fumi, let me have some of yours." "No, Dark Shadow. Cease this behavior at once." The moment Izuku and his friends stepped into class that morning, he instantly knew that something wasn't right. The problem was he couldn't figure out what exactly it was. It didn't have anything to do with how his classmates greeted him, though Shiro, Kaminari, and Kirishima seemed almost uneasy as they greeted him. It didn't have anything to do with the now 18 desks in the room. They all knew that Bakugo was expelled, though the change in the room was a little disorienting, nor did it have anything to do with the updated seating chart on the board. Wait a minute. That wasn't Mr. Aizawa's handwriting. For that matter, it was 8:20, 5 minutes before homeroom started. It wasn't like Mr. Aizawa to be late. Though the man spent class either asleep or looking and sounding like he would rather be asleep, he was never late. In fact, he was usually early if there were any announcements that had to be written on the board. For that matter, the man never took sick days either. He showed up to class after the USJ incident looking like a mummy, for crying out loud. That had been a choice. Something had clearly happened to him, but, "Good morning, everyone," Ms. Midnight chirped as she strode into the classroom as if she owned it. As everyone echoed her greeting, Izuku saw his classmates looking at one another in confusion or excitement, in Shiro and Kaminari's case. In his mind, he compared the handwriting on the board to something she had written for him a couple of weeks ago on one of his assignments. It was a match, meaning that she was the one to update the seating chart. But what did it mean in the long run? It didn't resolve the confusion around Mr. Aizawa, and judging by how Yaoyorozu shot her hand in the air, he clearly wasn't alone in his sentiment. "Excuse me, Ms. Midnight," Yaoyorozu called out. "But did something happen to Mr. Aizawa? Is he not coming in today?" The way the R-rated hero's face fell wasn't comforting, nor was the way she pinched the bridge of her nose. She closed her eyes for a moment before letting out a measured breath. "I suppose there's no use in hiding it from you all," she murmured almost to herself, shaking her head. "You're the ones being directly affected by it, and gossip spreads so fast that you'll probably find out by lunch. Aoyama, can you be a dear and shut the door, please?" The sense of dread that was already in the room at her non-answer only grew as the blonde shut the door, almost sinking into his seat with an incredibly uneasy smile. Kaminari looked around and raised his hand, looking genuinely scared as he was called on. "Is Mr. Aizawa dead?" he asked, much to everyone's horror. As he tried defending himself over his classmates' criticisms, Jair gave him a hard smack on the arm with one of her earphone jacks. "What is wrong with you?" Jair angrily asked. "How did you get that out of 'shut the door' and 'you'll find out by lunch'?" Kaminari rubbed his arm, glaring at the girl. "It's an honest question," he defended. "She's being all mysterious about it, so it's not my fault that I jumped dash." "Thank you, Jairu and Kaminari," Ms. Midnight called out over their bickering, looking rather exhausted by the whole spectacle. Scowling at each other, the two students faced the front. After waiting a minute to make sure that order had truly returned, she continued, turning to the electric boy. "Now, to answer your question, Kaminari, Mr. Aizawa isn't dead," she said with such a firmness that it caused a ripple of relieved sighs and laughs to ring through the room. Ms. Midnight's smile, however, was incredibly strained. She took a deep breath as she proceeded to drop the second biggest bombshell of the week. However, in light of some things that were brought to Principal Nizu's attention, his teaching license was suspended for the next 6 months. "I'll be covering his homeroom duties in the meantime." Everyone had different reactions. Izuku sat in dull shock, his stomach doing somersaults as the words tried and failed to get through to him. Uraraka and Ida exchanged looks of knowing and conflicted understanding respectively. Tokoyami nodded to himself thoughtfully, slapping a hand over Dark Shadow's mouth before he could say anything. Todoroki seemed to be having a hard time trying not to appear too happy as he leaned back in his seat. Everyone else immediately began whispering amongst themselves in varying states of confusion and relief. "Can teachers even be suspended?" Kaminari asked Aoyama, who gave a helpless shrug. "No more rational deceptions." Ashido said, almost collapsed onto the ground with relief, Sato and Kirishima following her lead. "What happened though?" Shiro asked Shuji. "Will he ever come back?" Hagakure asked. "I can't get into the specifics," Ms. Midnight called out over all of the chatter. "But if you want to discuss your feelings on the matter, now's the time to do so." Immediately, Ashido's hand shot up. "Does this have anything to do with Bakugo getting expelled?" she asked, sitting on the edge of her seat. The older woman pursed her lips, her eyes glimmering with disappointment. "With who?" "Izuku?" "Mr. Aizawa." I can't answer that question. Ciro's hand was next. Is it because of how he treated Midoriya? The class fell dead silent at his bluntness. It was a question that everyone, Izuku included, were dying to ask, but no one had the courage to. Izuku swallowed nervously. He hadn't meant to get Mr. Aizawa in so much trouble. Was he mad at him? Were the other teachers mad at him? He knew that Ms. Midnight and Mr. Mike were friends with him. Did they hate him? It didn't help when Ms. Midnight gave Izuku a fleetingly sad and sympathetic look before shaking her head. I can't answer that question, she stressed. But I will say this, I want you all to trust me just as I want to trust you all. I promise to ensure an open line of communication with all of you about anything. Understand? It seemed to be a coded message of sorts, and her eyes kept darting over to Izuku's, who was doing his best to blend in with the desk. Everyone else nodded their heads, feeling slightly more at ease as Mr. Mike knocked on the door. Good class. Something to distract me from the fact that I put my homeroom teacher out of a job for half of a year, Izuku thought to himself. Look on the bright side, you won't have him always glaring at you or calling you problem child anymore. I know this is pretty shocking, but I think we'll be able to weather the storm together, Ms. Midnight said, winking as she let her loud, blonde friend into the room to start his English lesson. We'll just give it the old plus ultra effort. All Might, I just wanted to let you know that I told some people about One for All. It's Uraraka, Ida, Azui, and Todoroki, and I really think that they should be included in our meetings about it. But that's if you're okay with it, of course. I didn't want to invite them without your blessing or anything. Tashinori chuckled to himself as he read the text message he received that morning from young Midoriya. His prince of nonsense could really be too much at times. He had a feeling that he'd be spending a lot of time explaining to him that One for All was now his quirk, meaning that it was up to him at the end of the day to decide who he did and didn't want to let in on the secret. But he supposed that the boy was still trying to keep him involved due to his own piece of the legacy that he had a hand in. He truly was too kind-hearted for words. Swallowing down the unexpected lump in his throat that popped up at the thought, he had quickly responded back with a promise to bring 4 extra teacups with him to their meeting room. He then proceeded to spend the rest of the morning grading some assignments, finishing up his lesson plans, and finishing the audiobook for the Eternity book he was in the middle of reading. He had to know how Eden would manage to perform the liver transplant without succumbing to her vampiric nature. All in all, he had a rather productive morning, which is why it surprised him when the clock struck 11. That fast? He mused to himself as he headed up to his usual meeting room. I must be getting old. Though he received ample heads up that he and young Midoriya wouldn't be the only ones in attendance, he still found himself taken by surprise when he found his green-haired successor, his boy, in the company of 4 of his closest friends. They looked almost as apprehensive as he did, but young Uraraka eventually took the lead and helped file them inside. Once the door was shut and locked behind them all, the 4 students sat on the couch across from him, quietly accepting his green tea. For a moment, they all drank in silence, unsure of what exactly to say until young Azui softly asked, "What do you two usually talk about, All Might?" All Might set his cup down and folded his hands in front of him, leaning forward slightly. "Well, young Azui, it depends," he started. "If he has any questions about One for All or if something related to it has happened, then we usually go from there. If not, then we just talk about other things like school or any hobbies we've picked up." Young Midoriya smiled at her and nodded. "Yeah. For example, All Might got me into this book series called Eternity Dash." Young Uraraka's eyes immediately lit up as they darted between her friend and the retired hero. "I love those books. I read them at the library all the time. Did you guys read the part about the liver transplant dash?" Young Ida shot his hand into the air with such intensity that it made their frog-like companion dodge with a surprised, "Ribbit." "Uraraka, we need to get back to the matter at hand, which is discussing One for All," the bespectacled boy lectured, earning a sheepish smile from the girl in return. "We need to use this valuable time wisely." "I wanted to know about the liver transplant," young Todoroki quietly said to no one in particular, making All Might bite back a bemused smile. The zero-gravity girl leaned over and whispered, "You can borrow the first 2 books from me later on today." Has anything strange concerning one for all happened to you as of late, Midoriya? Young Ida asked, turning to face the green-haired boy. We already know that it's a highly unusual quirk, but maybe due to it being a transferable one, there are some intricacies that are at work here that we haven't figured out. His successor frowned and tilted his head to the side, shaking his head. Other than the sports festival, I can't think of any Oh, I never told you all what happened at the sports festival. Well, you see, while I was fighting Shinso. As he regaled his friends with the tale of how he won his first match, they listened rather intently. Even when their faces scrunched up in concern, fear, or confusion, they waited patiently for him to finish before speaking up. It's a stockpiling quirk, so maybe those were remnants of the past one for all users, young Todoroki offered, coming to the same conclusion young Midoriya had done that day. But are they, alive inside Midoriya? Young Uraraka asked, her face paling. Or are they haunting him like ghosts? If they were ghosts, why was All Might there, Ribbit? Young Azui asked thoughtfully. He's clearly still alive. A haunted quirk. Young Ida muttered to himself, stroking his chin. Maybe the library has some information on those. All Might decided to let the kids take over this part of the conversation. They looked and sounded so passionate that he knew he wasn't going to get a word in otherwise. As they planned a series of research trips to both the school library as well as Mizudafu's public one, young Ida's arms practically chopped up the room as he coordinated a fair schedule for them all to follow. Though young Midoriya seemed almost overwhelmed under the protective attention, he looked lighter than he had ever seen him. Not better, necessarily, but lighter. It made the retired hero smile sadly at his boy. He knew the road to healing was going to be a long one, but it warmed his heart seeing that he had friends who were willing to stay by his side in the face of such a dangerous legacy. You're doing great with him, Tashinori. The long-missed voice of Nana rang through his head, making him jump slightly. I'm so proud of you. Swallowing down the lump in his throat, he rubbed his hands together in preparation to circle back the conversation before it got out of control. These were amazing kids, but he couldn't let them continue on their tangent about which library had the superior catalog of books and a summary of the Eternity Saga respectively. You've got some good friends, young Midoriya, Tashinori mused to himself. Do this old man a favor and hold on tight to them.